Miss Marple and the Harvest Ball Murder. St. Mary Mead was particularly resplendent in the golden hues of autumn. The ancient oaks that lined the village green had begun their annual transformation, their leaves turning to burnished copper and amber. The breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and ripening apples, a harbinger of the changing season that the villagers welcomed after an unusually warm summer. Jane Marple stood at her garden gate, secateurs in hand, critically examining the last of her prized dahlias. Despite her advanced years, her blue eyes remained clear and penetrating beneath a crown of fluffy white hair. She wore a modest floral dress beneath a practical cardigan, her appearance so commonplace and unremarkable that most people overlooked her entirely, a fact Miss Marple had long considered her greatest advantage. "Good morning, Miss Marple," called a cheerful voice. Colonel Prothero's daughter, Patricia Bennet, approached with purposeful strides. At 35, Patricia had returned to St. Mary Mead 3 years ago following her divorce, resuming her maiden name and taking up residence in Rose Cottage. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile. "How are the preparations for the Harvest Ball coming along?" Patricia's face brightened. As chairwoman of the village events committee, the annual Harvest Ball had become her passion project, transforming what had once been a modest gathering into the social event of the season. "Splendidly. The decorations are nearly complete. The catering is arranged. Though I'm still hoping you'll contribute one of your famous Victoria sponges for the dessert table, and we've even secured that jazz quartet from London. It's going to be quite different from previous years." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her tone neutral though her eyes observed the younger woman's enthusiasm with interest. "Change can be most invigorating, though not always welcomed by everyone, I find." Patricia's smile dimmed slightly. "You're thinking of Sir William Hargreaves, I suppose. He's been rather vocal about the vulgarization of village traditions, as he puts it." "Sir William has strong opinions on many matters," Miss Marple said diplomatically. "Well, he'll simply have to adjust." The committee voted unanimously for the changes. Even his nephew Charles supported the modernization, which rather put Sir William in his place. Patricia's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Haydock's car, which pulled up beside them. The village physician, a man in his 50s with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes, rolled down his window. "Good morning, ladies. Looking forward to Saturday's festivities?" "With great anticipation, Doctor," Miss Marple replied. "Though I do hope the weather holds. My rheumatism suggests rain might be on the way." "Your rheumatism is a better forecaster than the meteorological office," Dr. Haydock laughed. "But the latest report promises fair weather. Patricia, I wanted to mention that my niece Eliza arrived last night. She's quite keen to help with any last-minute preparations for the ball." Patricia's polite smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How kind of her, though I believe we have everything well in hand. Nevertheless, she'll be stopping by the village hall this afternoon. She's quite talented with floral arrangements. Studied it in London, you know." After the doctor drove away, Patricia sighed heavily. "That's all I need. Eliza Haydock swooping in at the last minute to critique our provincial efforts. She always was insufferably superior, even as a girl." "I recall her as rather shy," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Though it has been some years since she visited her uncle. Well, she's anything but shy now. Last summer in London, I attended a gallery opening, where she was holding court, like a duchess, surrounded by all sorts of artistic types." Patricia glanced at her watch. "I should go. The florist is delivering the arrangements at 11, and then I'm meeting Charles Hargreaves to finalize the seating plan." As Patricia hurried away, Miss Marple returned to her dahlias, though her mind was no longer on gardening. The annual Harvest Ball had been a tradition in St. Mary Mead for generations, but it had always been a simple affair. This year's event promised to be quite different, with its London musicians and elaborate decorations. Change, as Miss Marple well knew, often stirred up old resentments and buried rivalry. That evening, Miss Marple sat in her comfortable parlour, knitting needles, clicking rhythmically as she worked on a blue baby blanket for her grandniece's expected child. Her faithful companion, Cherry Baker, who came in daily to help with household tasks, bustled about preparing tea. "The village is positively buzzing about the ball, Miss Marple," Cherry said as she arranged scones on a plate. "My Tom says the old hall hasn't looked so grand in years." Those crystal chandeliers have all been polished until they sparkle like diamonds. I'm sure Patricia has seen to every detail, Miss Marple replied. Oh, indeed she has. Though there was quite a scene this afternoon, from what I hear. Sir William stormed into the hall while they were decorating, absolutely furious about something to do with the family portraits being moved to make room for some modern art pieces. His nephew tried to calm him down, but Sir William was having none of it. Said the Hargreaves family had hosted the Harvest Ball for 2 centuries and wouldn't have their traditions trampled upon. Miss Marple's needles paused momentarily. Sir William can be rather traditional in his view. That's putting it mildly. He threatened to withdraw his financial support entirely. And then that London girl, Dr. Haydock's niece, apparently suggested some compromise that only made matters worse. Tom said he thought Sir William might have an apoplexy right there on the spot. Dear me, Miss Marple murmured. It does sound rather dramatic. And that's not all, Cherry continued eagerly. Patricia Bennet and Eliza Haydock were at daggers drawn over the flower arrangements. Apparently Miss Haydock rearranged everything Patricia had done, claiming the original composition was provincial. Can you imagine? Of course Patricia wasn't going to stand for that. My Tom says he's never heard such polite insults in all his life. Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. Tensions and rivalries were common enough in village life, but there seemed to be an unusual undercurrent of hostility surrounding this year's festivities. Still, such conflicts generally dissolved into nothing more than gossip and temporarily bruised egos. Saturday evening arrived with perfect autumn weather. Just as Dr. Haydock had predicted, Miss Marple dressed with care in her best grey silk gown, adorned with a delicate lace collar fastened by a modest pearl brooch, a treasured gift from her mother. As she was not one for driving, her neighbour, Mr. Fairweather, had kindly offered to escort her to the ball. The old hall, home to the Hargreaves family for generations, stood at the edge of the village, its Jacobean architecture a testament to a bygone era of rural prosperity. Tonight, the drive was lined with flickering lanterns, and the grand entrance hall glowed with the light of hundreds of candles supplementing the electric chandeliers. Patricia Bennet greeted guests at the door, resplendent in a fashionable emerald gown that drew admiring glances. Her smile, however, seemed somewhat fixed, and Miss Marple noted the slight tension around her eyes.
Miss Marple,
how lovely you look, Patricia exclaimed. We've placed you at table 3, near the windows. I thought you'd enjoy the view of the garden. How thoughtful, my dear, Miss Marple replied, surveying the transformed hall. The traditional harvest decorations of wheat sheaves and autumn fruits had been supplemented with artistic floral displays and modern sculptures, positioned throughout the room. Along one wall, several abstract paintings hung where the Hargreaves family portraits had once been displayed. The evening began pleasantly enough, with the London Quartet playing a selection of music that blended traditional melodies with more contemporary pieces. Dinner was served, the conversation flowed along with the wine, and even Sir William Hargreaves, seated at the head table, seemed to have reconciled himself to the changes, conversing amiably with Dr. Haydock. It was during the interval between dinner and dancing that Miss Marple, returning from the ladies' powder room, overheard a heated exchange coming from a small antechamber off the main corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and though Miss Marple was not one to eavesdrop, the intensity of the voices caught her attention. You had no right. A man's voice, tight with controlled anger. This has gone far enough. I have every right, a woman responded coldly. Did you really think I wouldn't discover the truth? That I would simply remain silent? For God's sake, keep your voice down. This isn't the time or place. On the contrary, I think it's exactly the right time. Everyone is here, after all. Quite convenient, wouldn't you say? Miss Marple moved discreetly away as the door began to open, continuing down the corridor, as if she had noticed nothing. Behind her, she heard footsteps moving in opposite directions. When the dancing began, Miss Marple took a seat along the wall, content to observe the festivities. She noticed Eliza Haydock, elegant in a sophisticated black gown, dancing with Charles Hargreaves. The young man, heir to the Hargreaves estate, moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to privilege, while Eliza followed his lead, with the poise of a woman comfortable in society's upper echelons. From across the room, Patricia Bennet watched the pair, her expression unreadable. As the evening progressed, Sir William rose to deliver the traditional toast to the harvest, and the village's prosperity. His speech, though somewhat rambling, was received with warm applause. Yet Miss Marple noticed how his nephew Charles seemed distracted, his gaze repeatedly drifting to where Eliza now stood, chatting with Dr. Haydock and the vicar. Just as the music resumed, a sharp cry echoed from the direction of Sir William's study, cutting through the revelry like a knife. The musicians faltered, conversations ceased, and a sudden hush fell over the gathering. Haydock was the first to react, moving swiftly toward the source of the sound. Miss Marple rose slowly from her seat, her expression grave. In her experience, such sounds rarely heralded anything but tragedy, even in the midst of celebration. As guests began to murmur in concern and speculation, she observed their faces, some curious, others alarmed, and a few she noted with interest, showing expressions that seemed oddly like relief or grim satisfaction. Within moments, Dr. Haydock's voice rang out, calling urgently for everyone to remain where they were. The local police constable, who had been enjoying the festivities in an off-duty capacity, hurried to assist, his festive demeanor replaced by professional authority. Patricia Bennet, her face pale, began ushering guests away from the corridor that led to Sir William's study. "Please, everyone, return to your tables. I'm sure it's nothing serious." But Miss Marple, watching the flurry of activity with keen eyes, knew better. The Harvest Ball, St. Mary Mead's most cherished tradition, had been irreversibly transformed. No longer merely a celebration of autumn's bounty, it would henceforth be remembered as the night death came to dance among them, choosing its partner with deliberate and fatal precision. The news spread through the ballroom like frost across a window pane. Sir William Hargreaves, patriarch of St. Mary Mead's most prominent family and benefactor of the Harvest Ball for over 30 years, had been found dead in his study, not from natural causes, but with an ornate letter opener embedded in his chest. Inspector Craddock, summoned hastily from the neighbouring town of Much Benham, arrived within the hour. By then, Haydock had confirmed what everyone already suspected. Sir William had been murdered, likely within the half-hour preceding the discovery of his body, by a young server who had entered the study to retrieve additional bottles of the Hargreaves' prized port. The cavernous ballroom, so recently filled with music and laughter, had become a holding area for shell-shocked guests. The London Quartet, instruments packed away, sat awkwardly at an empty table. Wait staff hovered uncertainly near the doors, while village constable Jenkins solemnly guarded the corridor leading to the study, turning away curious onlookers with newfound authority. Miss Marple sat quietly in her corner, pale blue eyes observing the tableau of humanity before her. Shock manifested differently in each person. Patricia Bennet maintained a facade of composure as she spoke in hushed tones with the inspector, though her hands fidgeted ceaselessly with her emerald-beaded necklace. Charles Hargreaves stood rigidly by the fireplace, his face ashen, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, and Eliza Haydock, no longer the sophisticated London visitor, perched uneasily on a chair beside her uncle, fingers pressed against her lips, as though to hold back words better left unspoken. "It's simply unbelievable," murmured Mrs. Bantry, who had taken the seat beside Miss Marple. The Colonel's widow, a long-time friend, clutched her embroidered evening bag, as if it might anchor her to sanity. Sir William, of all people, who would want him dead? One finds that the most unlikely victims often have the most numerous enemies, Miss Marple replied softly, her needles now still in her lap, the blue baby blanket momentarily forgotten. Mrs. Bantry leaned closer. "They're saying he was stabbed with his own letter opener, that antique silver thing he was so proud of. A family heirloom, I believe."
"Indeed? How very convenient."
Miss Marple's gaze drifted to where Inspector Craddock was now speaking with Charles Hargreaves, whose rigid posture suggested a man struggling to maintain control.
"I heard Patricia Bennet discovered the body," Mrs. Bantry continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Along with that server boy. She'd gone looking for more port, apparently."
"I thought it was the young server who found him," Miss Marple said mildly. "Well, yes, but Patricia was right behind him. Dreadful shock for her, especially after all the work she put into this evening, and after that awful argument with Sir William yesterday."
"Oh, I hadn't heard about that."
Mrs. Bantry looked surprised. "It was all over the village. Something about Patricia wanting to auction off one of the Hargreaves' antique tapestries, to raise funds for the new community centre. Sir William was absolutely livid. Said she was overstepping her bounds and trying to sell off his family's heritage. They had quite the row in the post office. Miss Weatherby said she'd never seen Sir William so angry. "How interesting," murmured Miss Marple. Her gaze shifted to Dr. Haydock, who was now speaking earnestly with his niece. The young woman shook her head repeatedly, her dark eyes wide with what might have been fear or indignation. Across the room, the vicar, Reverend Clement, attempted to offer comfort to distressed guests, though his own discomfort was evident in his frequent adjustment of his clerical collar. His wife, normally a pillar of composed empathy, appeared particularly affected, dabbing repeatedly at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. As the evening wore on, Inspector Craddock methodically interviewed key individuals, beginning with those closest to Sir William. The guests, initially united in shocked disbelief, gradually splintered into small groups, whispered theories passing between them like illicit currency. "It must have been an outsider," declared Colonel Appleby, retired military man and longtime friend of the deceased. "Some vagrant who saw the lights thought the house would be empty during the festivities. Sir William probably interrupted a burglary, but nothing was taken," countered Mr. Weatherby, the local solicitor. "And how would an outsider know which room was Sir William's study? No, this was personal. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Charles inherits everything, of course," Mrs. Bantry informed Miss Marple, with the air of someone sharing an obvious but necessary fact. "The estate, the investments, those valuable art pieces Sir William collected. Quite a substantial inheritance, by all accounts." "Inheritance can be a powerful motive," Miss Marple agreed, "though rarely the only one." "What do you mean?" "Simply that money matters often intertwine with affairs of the heart, or wounded pride, human nature being what it is." Inspector Craddock approached their corner, notebook in hand. Though relatively young for his position, his shrewd eyes and methodical manner suggested competence. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he acknowledged, with a nod. "I'm afraid I must ask you both a few questions. Routine, you understand." Mrs. Bantry eagerly recounted her movements throughout the evening, providing far more detail than required, and offering several theories about the murderer's identity, each more dramatic than the last. Miss Marple, when her turn came, spoke simply and precisely about what she had observed. "And you heard an argument earlier this evening?" the inspector pressed, referring to the heated exchange Miss Marple had overheard. "I heard raised voices coming from the antechamber off the main corridor. Yes, though I couldn't say with certainty who was speaking." "But you believed it was a man and a woman?" "Yes, that was my impression, and this was approximately just after dinner concluded, perhaps 20 minutes before Sir William gave his speech." Inspector Craddock made a note. "Did you observe anyone entering or leaving Sir William's study at any point during the evening?" Miss Marple considered carefully. "I did notice Mr. Charles Hargreaves walking in that direction shortly after the argument I overheard. And later, Miss Haydock passed through the corridor that leads to the study wing. Both might have had perfectly innocent reasons, of course." "Of course," the inspector agreed, though his tone suggested nothing was being considered innocent until proven so. After the inspector moved on to his next interview, Mrs. Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm. "You don't think Charles could have done it? His own uncle?" "I wouldn't presume to speculate," Miss Marple replied, "though family relationships can be the most complex of all. I find, by midnight, the inspector had completed his preliminary interviews. The local police photographer and forensic team had finished their work in the study, and Sir William's body had been respectfully removed. Guests were finally permitted to leave, though each was instructed to remain available for further questioning. Miss Marple accepted Mr. Fairweather's offer of a ride home, her thoughts turning over the events of the evening like puzzle pieces that had yet to find their proper places. The following morning broke with unseasonable warmth and brilliant sunshine that seemed to mock the shadow now cast over St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple rose early, as was her habit, and was tending to her garden when Cherry Baker arrived, breathless with news and theory. "The whole village is talking of nothing else, Miss Marple. Poor Sir William. And on such a night, too. My Tom says he never saw such chaos. Police everywhere, guests being questioned until all hours." "Yes, it was most distressing," Miss Marple agreed. carefully deadheading a late-blooming rose. "They're saying it must have been someone who knew the house well," Cherry continued, hanging her coat in the hall. "Sir William's study was quite tucked away from the main reception rooms. And did you hear about the argument?" "Which argument would that be, Cherry? There seem to have been several." "Why, between Sir William and his nephew. Mrs. Hodges, who does the cleaning at the old hall, told me she overheard them quarrelling terribly just yesterday morning. Something about Charles wanting to sell off parts of the estate to developers. Sir William was absolutely furious, said he'd change his will before he'd let Charles destroy the family legacy." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, that would be a significant development. And that's not all," Cherry lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Mrs. Hodges says she found a letter in Sir William's wastepaper basket, torn up, mind you, but she's not above a bit of curiosity. It was from some woman claiming Sir William had promised to marry her years ago. Can you imagine? At his age. Age is rarely an impediment to foolishness, I find," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Did Mrs. Hodges happen to mention the lady's name?" "That's just it. The signature was torn off. But whoever she was threatening to come to the ball and make a scene if Sir William didn't honour his commitments. Mrs. Hodges thinks it might have been that Mrs. Farrington, who moved to the new development last spring, she's been quite forward about pursuing eligible widowers." As Cherry bustled about preparing breakfast, Miss Marple reflected on these new pieces of information. The tapestry of motives and opportunities was growing more complex by the hour. Later that morning, Miss Marple walked to the village shop, a journey that normally took 10 minutes, but today required nearly 30, as she was stopped repeatedly by neighbours eager to share their theories about Sir William's murder. "It was definitely an outside job," insisted Mr. Harmon, the butcher. "These fancy events attract all sorts. Probably someone from London followed that jazz quartet down here." "Nonsense," countered Mrs. Price, the postmistress. "It was a crime of passion, mark my words. Did you know that Eliza Haydock was once engaged to Charles Hargreaves, years ago before she went off to London? Then she comes back just when he's apparently spending time with Patricia Bennet. Jealousy's a powerful motive." By the time Miss Marple reached the village green, she had heard no fewer than 6 distinct theories, each delivered with absolute conviction. She paused by the war memorial, her thoughts interrupted by the appearance of Dr. Haydock's car. The doctor pulled up beside her, his face grave. "Miss Marple, good morning. I thought you might like to know that Inspector Craddock has asked me to perform the post-mortem this afternoon, given the circumstances." "Very sensible," Miss Marple nodded. "One assumes the letter opener was the murder weapon." "Yes, though there are certain peculiarities. The angle of entry, for one thing." Dr. Haydock frowned. "But I shouldn't discuss such details before I've completed my examination."
"Of course not. And how is your niece bearing up?"
"She seemed quite distressed last night." A shadow crossed the doctor's face. "Eliza is complicated. She and Sir William had a rather tense relationship, I'm afraid. Something to do with an art authentication he commissioned from her gallery last year. She felt he dismissed her expertise too readily. An unfortunate misunderstanding, I'm sure. Perhaps, though Eliza can be unforgiving when she feels her professional judgment has been questioned." Dr. Haydock sighed. "She's planning to return to London tomorrow. Says she can't bear the provincial dramatics, as she puts it. Though Inspector Craddock may have something to say about that." As the doctor drove away, Miss Marple continued her walk, her mind whirring with connections and possibilities. The village had transformed overnight, suspicion and speculation infecting even the most mundane interactions. Old grievances were being resurrected, embellished and offered up as potential motives for murder. At the village shop, Miss Marple encountered Patricia Bennet, selecting items with distracted efficiency. The younger woman's usual polished appearance had given way to a more haggard look, dark circles beneath her eyes, testifying to a sleepless night. "Miss Marple," Patricia acknowledged with a strained smile. "What a dreadful business. The police have been at the hall all morning, going through everything. Poor Charles is beside himself." "It must be terribly difficult for him," Miss Marple agreed, "losing his uncle in such circumstances, and now having to deal with all the formalities." Patricia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a tin of tea. "Inspector Craddock seems very thorough. He asked the most peculiar questions about my relationship with Sir William, as if I might have had reason to wish him harm. The police must consider all possibilities, Miss Marple said gently. Though I'm sure your disagreement over the tapestry auction was merely a difference of opinion. Patricia's eyes widened. How did you? Yes, we did have words about that. Sir William could be terribly old-fashioned about certain things, but to suggest that would make me, it's absurd. Of course it is, my dear. Though I've often observed that in cases of this nature, the truth often lies buried in the past, rather than in recent disputes. Patricia gave her a strange look. What exactly do you mean by that, Miss Marple? Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Charles Hargreaves, his handsome face haggard with grief and strain. He nodded curtly to Miss Marple before turning to Patricia. I've been looking everywhere for you, he said, his voice low and urgent. Inspector Craddock wants to speak with us both again. Something about discrepancies in our statements. A flash of alarm crossed Patricia's face. Discrepancies? But that's ridiculous. We told him exactly what happened. Nevertheless, he's waiting at the hall. Charles's gaze flicked nervously around the shop. We should go. As they hurried out, Miss Marple noted the protective way Charles placed his hand at Patricia's elbow, guiding her. Yet, there was tension in the gesture, a rigidity that spoke of more than mere concern. Miss Marple completed her shopping with deliberate care, selecting a new skein of blue wool for her grandniece's blanket, and exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Elliot, the shopkeeper, who was all too eager to share her own theories about the murder. It's the money, mark my words, Mrs. Elliot declared confidently. Sir William was worth a fortune, and now it all goes to Charles. Though I heard the old man was thinking of changing his will, didn't trust Charles's judgment, apparently. Indeed, Miss Marple's expression remained mild, though her interest sharpened. And where did you hear that, Mrs. Elliot?
Why?
From Mrs. Hodges, who does for them at the hall. She says Sir William had an appointment with Mr. Weatherby. You know, the solicitor, for next Tuesday, said he had important changes to discuss. This new information accompanied Miss Marple home, where she spent the afternoon quietly knitting by the window that overlooked her garden. As dusk fell, softening the edges of the autumn flowers, she observed Eliza Haydock walking briskly past, her elegant figure distinctive even in the fading light. Minutes later, Charles Hargreaves followed the same path, his stride purposeful, his shoulders hunched against recognition. Miss Marple set her knitting aside with a thoughtful expression. The patterns forming in her mind were beginning to take shape, like one of her intricate knitting designs, but several crucial stitches were still missing. Connections that, once made, would reveal the complete picture. The telephone rang, startling her from her reverie. It was Inspector Craddock, his tone professionally cordial.
Miss Marple, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wondered if I might call on you this evening. There are a few additional questions I'd like to ask, and I've found that your observations at these village events often prove insightful.
I would be delighted, Inspector, Miss Marple replied. Shall we say 7 o'clock? I'll have Cherry prepare some tea. Inspector Craddock arrived precisely at 7, declining tea in favor of continuing his inquiries without delay. Miss Marple, recognizing the earnestness of a dedicated professional, settled into her armchair opposite him, her knitting set aside for the moment. I appreciate your time, Miss Marple, the inspector began, flipping open his notebook. I understand from our previous conversations that you have a rather unique perspective on village life. I wouldn't say unique, Inspector, she demurred with a modest smile. One simply observes human nature, and human nature, I find, varies remarkably little, whether in St. Mary Mead or in the great metropolis.
Indeed.
Craddock's tone suggested he knew better than to underestimate the elderly lady before him. I'm particularly interested in the relationships between our principal figures. Sir William seems to have had complex interactions with several people present at the ball. Sir William was a man of strong opinions, Miss Marple acknowledged. Such individuals often engender equally strong reactions in others. Precisely. The inspector consulted his notes. You mentioned overhearing an argument between a man and a woman shortly before Sir William's death. Having had time to reflect, do you have any thoughts on who those individuals might have been? Miss Marple considered carefully. The woman's voice had a certain cultured quality, what one might call refined. The man spoke with authority, though there was an undercurrent of desperation perhaps. Could it have been Charles Hargreaves and Eliza Haydock? It could have been, Miss Marple allowed, though I couldn't say with certainty. What about Patricia Bennett and Charles Hargreaves? I understand they've become quite close in recent months. Indeed they have, though Miss Bennett did mention that Charles and Miss Haydock were previously acquainted. More than acquainted, according to Dr. Haydock, Craddock revealed. They were engaged briefly, some years ago, before Miss Haydock moved to London. The engagement ended rather suddenly, and not, I gather, by mutual agreement. How interesting, murmured Miss Marple. One so often finds that the past casts long shadows into the present. Craddock leaned forward slightly. The post-mortem revealed something curious, Miss Marple. Sir William was killed by the letter opener. Yes, but Dr. Haydock believes he was unconscious when stabbed. There was a significant contusion on the back of his head, suggesting he was struck from behind first. Miss Marple nodded. Most illuminating. Also, the time of death has been narrowed down. Dr. Haydock estimates Sir William died between 9:15 and 9:45 p.m. during his own speech or shortly thereafter. But surely Sir William gave his speech. I distinctly recall applauding. He did indeed. But here's the peculiar thing. Several witnesses report seeing Sir William leave the ballroom immediately after his toast, heading in the direction of his study. Yet others insist he remained to watch the first dance. Memory can be unreliable in times of stress, Miss Marple observed, though I do recall seeing Sir William speaking with Reverend Clement near the punch bowl after his speech. They seemed engaged in quite a serious conversation. The inspector made a note that would contradict the statement from Mrs. Farrington, who claimed she saw Sir William heading toward his study immediately after his toast, looking troubled and in a hurry. Mrs. Farrington, Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. The widow who moved to the new development last spring? The same. Do you know her well? Not well, no. Though I understand she has been quite active in village social circles since her arrival, particularly among the widowers and bachelors. Craddock's expression remained neutral, though his pen moved quickly across his notebook. There's another matter that may interest you. We found a partially burned letter in the fireplace of Sir William's study. Most of it was destroyed, but a fragment remained legible. It appears to be from a woman claiming Sir William had made certain promises to her. Promises of marriage, perhaps? Miss Marple suggested innocently. Craddock looked up sharply. How did you know that? One hears such things, Inspector. Village housekeepers can be remarkably observant. Mrs. Hodges, he nodded, understanding. Yes, you mentioned finding a torn letter, but she couldn't identify the sender. And the fragment you recovered from the fireplace? Was there a signature? Unfortunately not. Just the phrase, expect you to honor your commitment as a gentleman would, and something about making public what should have remained private. It sounds rather like blackmail, Miss Marple observed mildly. That was my thought as well. Though blackmail over what, precisely, remains unclear. The inspector continued with his questions, methodically exploring Miss Marple's observations of the key players in the drama. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. One final question, if I may. Did you notice anything unusual about Charles Hargreaves' behavior during the evening? Before the discovery of the body, that is. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, recalling. He seemed preoccupied during dinner, and there was a moment, after Sir William's speech, when I observed him watching Miss Haydock, with what one might call intense concern. When she left the room briefly, he followed almost immediately. In what direction did Miss Haydock go? Toward the east wing, where I believe the study is located. Craddock nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Marple. You've been most helpful. After the inspector left, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, though her thoughts remained on the case. The rhythmic click of her needles provided a soothing counterpoint to the theories forming in her mind. The following morning brought a fresh flurry of activity to St. Mary Mead. Inspector Craddock and his team were seen entering the old hall early, accompanied by a photographer and several officers carrying evidence bags. By mid-morning, rumor had spread that they were conducting a second, more thorough search of the premises. Miss Marple, setting out for her weekly visit to the vicarage, encountered Mrs. Bantry near the church. Have you heard? Mrs. Bantry exclaimed without preamble. They've taken Patricia Bennett in for further questioning. My gardener's son works at the police station, and he says she was there for hours yesterday evening. Indeed, Miss Marple's expression remained placid, though her interest sharpened. One assumes the police must follow every possible lead. But Patricia, it seems incredible, though I must say, her relationship with Sir William was always rather strained. He never quite forgave her father for certain financial decisions that affected the Hargreaves' investments. Ancient history, really. But Sir William had a long memory for grievances. The past often informs the present, Miss Marple agreed. Though one wonders if the police are also questioning others. Charles Hargreaves, for instance. Oh, they've questioned Charles extensively. I understand. And that London girl, Dr. Haydock's niece? Apparently she's postponed her return to the city at the inspector's request. Rather inconvenient for her, I imagine. At the vicarage, Miss Marple found Mrs. Clement in a state of nervous agitation. The vicar's wife, usually a model of composure, paced the sitting room as she poured tea with trembling hands. It's all so dreadful, Miss Marple. The whole village on edge, everyone suspecting everyone else, and now the police questioning dear Patricia, as if she could possibly have had anything to do with such a terrible crime. The police must be thorough, Miss Marple reminded her gently. Though I'm sure they'll soon identify the true culprit. Mrs. Clement sank into a chair, her face drawn. Leonard is quite devastated. He and Sir William were discussing plans for the church restoration fund, only moments before it happened. Sir William had promised a substantial donation, you know, and now, with everything in such disarray, I'm sure Charles will honor his uncle's commitments, Miss Marple suggested. That's just it. Mrs. Clement leaned forward, lowering her voice. Leonard says Charles knew nothing about this particular donation. Sir William had been keeping certain financial decisions private of late. Something about not trusting Charles's judgment in monetary matters.
How interesting, murmured Miss Marple.
And when was this donation to be announced? At the harvest ball. Sir William had planned to make it public during his speech, but he never mentioned it. Did he? I wonder why. Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. Perhaps he was interrupted before he could do so, or perhaps he changed his mind at the last moment. That's possible, I suppose, though it would be unlike him to renege on a commitment once made. Sir William was many things, but he was a man of his word. As Miss Marple walked home from the vicarage, she took a slightly longer route that passed by the old hall. Police activity continued around the property, with officers coming and going. She paused by the garden gate, ostensibly to admire the late roses, when Haydock emerged from the main entrance, medical bag in hand. Miss Marple, he greeted her with a tired smile. Taking your constitutional? Just admiring the gardens, she replied, though they seem rather neglected of late. Sir William was always so particular about his roses. Yes, he was passionate about many things, the doctor agreed. His gardens, his art collection, his family tradition, and all now passed to Charles, Miss Marple observed. A heavy responsibility for a young man. Dr. Haydock's expression grew guarded. Indeed, though Charles has his own ideas about the estate's future, ideas that didn't always align with his uncle's vision. Change is inevitable, I suppose, Miss Marple said mildly, though not always welcome. Sir William certainly resisted it, even when change might have been for the better. The doctor glanced back at the house. Inspector Craddock has asked me to review some additional findings. Medical details that may help establish the precise sequence of events. How thorough of him. And your niece, is she still in the village? A flash of concern crossed the doctor's face. Yes, though she's most anxious to return to London. She has exhibitions to prepare, clients waiting. This delay is inconvenient. The pursuit of justice often is, Miss Marple observed, though I'm sure the inspector will only keep her as long as absolutely necessary. After parting from Dr. Haydock, Miss Marple continued her walk, her mind cataloguing these new pieces of information. The picture taking shape in her mind was still incomplete, but certain patterns were beginning to emerge. Patterns she had observed before in human behavior, albeit in different contexts. That afternoon, while Miss Marple was deadheading the last of her dahlias, she was surprised by a visit from Eliza Haydock. The younger woman, elegant even in casual attire, approached with an air of determined nonchalance. Miss Marple, isn't it? My uncle speaks highly of you. Says you have quite the reputation for insight. Dr. Haydock is too kind, Miss Marple smiled, setting aside her secateurs. Would you care for some tea? Cherry has just brought out a fresh pot. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. That would be lovely, thank you. In the garden, seated among the fading blooms of autumn, Eliza seemed less assured than she had at the ball. She fidgeted with her teacup, her eyes darting occasionally toward the garden gate, as if expecting an interruption. This is a charming garden, she offered. So quintessentially English countryside. Thank you, my dear. I find gardening most therapeutic. One learns patience, watching things grow and change in their own time. I prefer faster results myself, Eliza admitted. In London, everything moves quickly, especially in the art world. I understand you work in art authentication. How fascinating. Eliza's expression sharpened. Who told you that? I believe your uncle mentioned it. Something about a disagreement with Sir William regarding an authentication. That. Eliza relaxed slightly. A minor professional difference of opinion. Sir William had acquired what he believed to be an early constable landscape. I had the unfortunate task of informing him it was likely a very good reproduction from the late Victorian period. He must have been disappointed. Furious would be more accurate. He accused me of incompetence, suggested I was deliberately undervaluing the piece to damage his reputation as a collector. Eliza's tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the underlying tension. Of course, subsequent analysis proved me correct, but Sir William never acknowledged his error. Classic wounded pride. Men of Sir William's generation often find it difficult to admit mistakes. Miss Marple agreed, particularly to younger women. Precisely. Eliza set down her cup with a decisive click. Miss Marple, I'll be direct. I understand the police have been questioning you about the events at the ball. Inspector Craddock has been very thorough. Yes. I wonder, what have you told him about me? Miss Marple regarded her visitor with mild surprise. Only what I observed, my dear, that you were present at the ball, that you danced with Charles Hargreaves, and that you passed along the corridor toward the study wing at one point during the evening. Eliza's composed facade faltered momentarily. I see. And did you mention when? Exactly. I walked down that corridor. I believe it was shortly after Sir William's speech, though my memory may not be entirely precise. It wasn't, Eliza said quickly. After his speech, I mean. It was much earlier, before dinner, actually. I was looking for the powder room, and took a wrong turn. How easy to do in such a large house, Miss Marple nodded. Especially for someone not familiar with the layout. Exactly. Eliza seemed relieved by this understanding. The layout is quite confusing, and with so many people about, one gets turned around. Though I believe you've visited the old hall before, during your previous relationship with Charles, the direct question caught Eliza off guard. That was years ago, she said after a moment. And we rarely spent time at the main house. Sir William didn't approve of me even then. Thought I was distracting Charles from his responsibilities to the estate. Fathers and uncles can be quite protective of family traditions, Miss Marple observed. And now, of course, Charles is free to make his own decisions about the future of the estate and his personal life. Something flashed in Eliza's eyes, an emotion quickly suppressed. Charles has always been free to make his own decisions, she said carefully, though some choices have consequences one doesn't fully anticipate at the time. Before Miss Marple could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Craddock, who appeared somewhat surprised to find Eliza there. Miss Haydock, Miss Marple, he greeted them. I apologize for the intrusion. Not at all, Inspector. Miss Marple smiled. Would you care for tea? There's plenty. Thank you. No, I was actually looking for Miss Haydock. We have a few additional questions that have arisen from our investigation. Eliza rose, smoothing her skirt with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. Of course, Inspector. I'm at your disposal. As they prepared to leave, Craddock turned to Miss Marple. By the way, we've made an interesting discovery. The letter opener used to kill Sir William. It hadn't been in his study for years. According to the housekeeper, it was normally kept in a display case in the library. How curious, Miss Marple remarked. So someone must have taken it from the library specifically for the purpose of... Exactly, Craddock nodded grimly. This was no crime of opportunity or momentary passion. It was planned. After they departed, Miss Marple remained in her garden, watching as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn. She recalled a case from her youth, a family inheritance disputed, a questionable art collection, a sudden death that resolved certain problems while creating others. Human nature, she reflected, remained remarkably consistent in its capacity for both love and resentment, generosity and greed. That evening, as Miss Marple prepared for bed, her telephone rang, an unusual occurrence at such a late hour. It was Mrs. Bantry, her voice pitched high with excitement. "Jane, the most extraordinary development. Charles Hargreaves has been arrested. My gardener's son just came by to tell me. They took him in an hour ago. Apparently they found the missing piece of that burned letter in his coat pocket." "Can you imagine?" "How very interesting," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm, despite the startling news. "Did your gardener's son happen to mention what this piece of the letter revealed?" "Only that it was addressed to Sir William and signed by a woman. The police aren't saying who yet, but village gossip suggests it might have been from Mrs. Farrington. You know, the widow who's been setting her cap at every eligible man in the county." "Indeed? How? Enlightening." "The strange thing is," Mrs. Bantry continued, "Charles claims he's never seen the letter before. Says someone must have planted it in his pocket during the confusion after the body was discovered." "A convenient explanation," Miss Marple observed. "Isn't it just, though, why Charles would keep such incriminating evidence? It doesn't make sense, Jane." "Unless he wanted it found," Miss Marple suggested quietly. "Good night, Dolly. I expect tomorrow will bring further developments." Miss Marple slept poorly that night, her dreams filled with fragmented images, a silver letter opener gleaming in candlelight, a half-burned letter in a fireplace, Sir William's portrait watching from the wall, with painted eyes that somehow managed to look betrayed. She woke earlier than usual, a specific connection having formed in her mind during those twilight hours between sleep and wakefulness. After breakfast, she requested Cherry to escort her to the old hall, explaining that she wished to pay her respects to the family during this difficult time. Despite police tape cordoning off sections of the property, the housekeeper admitted them, leading Miss Marple to a small sitting room where Patricia Bennet sat alone, a cup of cold tea before her. "Miss Marple," Patricia greeted her with surprise, "I didn't expect visitors today. I thought you might appreciate some company, my dear. Such trying circumstances for everyone." Patricia's composure wavered. "They've arrested Charles. It's utterly ridiculous. He would never harm his uncle, despite their disagreements." "The police must have had some reason," Miss Marple said gently. "That wretched letter fragment. Charles swears he knows nothing about it. Someone is trying to frame him. It's the only explanation." "Perhaps," Miss Marple agreed. "May I ask, my dear, whether you were acquainted with Mrs. Farrington before her move to the village?" Patricia looked startled by the apparent change of subject. "Mrs. Farrington? Not really, no. We've met at various village functions, of course, but we don't socialize. Why do you ask?" "Mere curiosity. She seems to have made quite an impression in a short time, particularly on Sir William. I understand." A flicker of something annoyance, concern, crossed Patricia's face. "Sir William found her amusing, I believe, though I doubt it was anything more serious. He was rather set in his ways." "Indeed. And yet, rumors suggest he may have made certain promises to her. Promises of a personal nature." Patricia's laugh held a brittle edge. "Sir William, marrying again at his age? It's absurd. Besides, he was—" She stopped abruptly. "He was what, my dear?" "Nothing. It's not important." Patricia rose, straightening her skirt with nervous hands. "I appreciate your visit, Miss Marple, but I have so much to attend to. The funeral arrangements, dealing with the police, trying to reassure Charles's solicitor. Of course, I understand completely." Miss Marple stood, her manner apologetic. "Just one small thing before I go. The tapestry you wished to auction for the community centre fund, was it by any chance the Flemish hunting scene from the East drawing room?" Patricia's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "I recall admiring it during a garden party some years ago. Sir William mentioned it was particularly valuable, a family heirloom with historical significance." "Yes, That's the one. It seemed the perfect choice, given its value and the fact it was rarely displayed. But Sir William refused even to consider it. How disappointing for you, especially when such a sale might have resolved certain financial difficulties. Patricia's posture stiffened. What exactly are you implying, Miss Marple? Nothing at all, my dear. Simply that community projects often struggle for funding, and such a valuable piece would have been a tremendous boon. Miss Marple smiled benignly. I should be going. Please give my regards to Charles when you see him. As Cherry escorted her home, Miss Marple's mind worked steadily, connecting threads that others might overlook. The pieces were falling into place, forming a pattern as familiar to her as her favorite knitting stitches. Human nature, she reflected, was remarkably predictable in its complexity. Greed, love, jealousy, revenge, the oldest motives in the world, dressed in modern clothes but unchanged in their essential nature. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple placed a telephone call to Inspector Craddock, requesting a brief meeting at her cottage. His response suggested both curiosity and a certain respect for her insights. I believe I may have observed something relevant to your investigation, Inspector, she explained. Something perhaps overlooked in the confusion of that evening. I'll be there at 6, Miss Marple, Craddock replied, and I must say I find myself looking forward to hearing your observations. As she replaced the receiver, Miss Marple smiled gently to herself. The truth, as always, lay in the details, those small, seemingly insignificant actions and reactions that revealed far more than elaborate statements or careful alibis. And she had noticed a most telling detail indeed. Inspector Craddock arrived at Miss Marple's cottage promptly at 6, declining refreshments in favor of getting straight to business. You mentioned observing something relevant, Miss Marple? Yes, Inspector, she replied, settling into her armchair. It concerns the timing of Sir William's movements after his speech. You mentioned some witnesses claimed he left immediately, while others insisted he remained for a time. That's correct. The discrepancy has been problematic. I believe I may have the explanation. Miss Marple's knitting needles lay idle in her lap as she spoke. During Sir William's speech, did you happen to notice his cufflinks? Craddock frowned. His cufflinks? I can't say that I did. They were quite distinctive, gold with small ruby insets. Family heirlooms, I believe. Sir William wore them only on special occasions. And this is significant, because when I observed him speaking with Reverend Clement after his speech, those cufflinks were absent. Instead, he wore plain gold ones, handsome, but not the same pair. Craddock leaned forward. You're suggesting simply that the person seen after the speech may not have been Sir William at all. Miss Marple's blue eyes were sharp, despite her gentle tone. The lighting was subdued, the room crowded. Someone of similar build, dressed identically, a deliberate attempt to establish Sir William as alive later than he actually was, Craddock concluded. But who would have the opportunity to impersonate him? Someone who knew his habits, his mannerisms, someone with access to his wardrobe. Miss Marple paused. Someone who stood to benefit from confusion about the time of death. The inspector's expression darkened. Charles Hargreaves, perhaps, though one should consider all possibilities. After the inspector left, Miss Marple reflected on the case's complexities. Charles remained the primary suspect, yet certain details troubled her inconsistencies that suggested a more intricate plot than a simple inheritance dispute. The following morning brought news that electrified the village. Charles had been released. The evidence against him was deemed insufficient for formal charges. Miss Marple was pruning her roses when Dr. Haydock's car pulled up outside her gate. I thought you'd want to know, he said without preamble. The fragment of letter found in Charles' pocket? The handwriting doesn't match the burned portions found in Sir William's fireplace. The police believe it was a deliberate plant. How interesting, Miss Marple murmured. And has your niece been permitted to return to London? Not yet. In fact, Inspector Craddock interviewed her again this morning. Something about discrepancies in her timeline. The doctor hesitated. Jane, Eliza is many things, but I cannot believe she's a murderer. The truth will emerge, I'm sure, Miss Marple assured him, though it may be more complicated than it first appeared. That afternoon, Miss Marple made a point of walking past Mrs. Farrington's cottage in the new development. The widow, An attractive woman in her 50s with carefully maintained blonde hair was tending to her front garden.
Miss Marple. How lovely. Would you care for some tea? Her manner was effusive, her smile practiced.
Over tea served in delicate china cups, Mrs. Farrington proved eager to discuss the murder. Such a tragedy. Sir William was a true gentleman, a rare quality these days. You knew him well? Miss Marple inquired innocently. We had become friendly since my arrival in the village. A coy smile played at her lips. He appreciated mature companionship, I think. Men of his standing often do. Indeed? I understand there may have been some correspondence between you. Mrs. Farrington's smile faltered briefly. Sir William and I exchanged notes occasionally. Yes, simple social communications. Nothing of a more personal nature. I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Marple. Her tone had cooled considerably. Not implying anything, my dear. Simply seeking to understand the full picture. The police are quite interested in a particular letter that was partially burned in Sir William's fireplace. Mrs. Farrington set down her cup with a sharp click. If you're referring to private correspondence between myself and Sir William, I fail to see how it's relevant to his murder. Our relationship was nobody's business but our own. Quite so, Miss Marple agreed mildly. Though I understand Sir William was considering changing his will, perhaps to include provisions for someone new in his life. The other woman's composure cracked momentarily, revealing a flash of something harder beneath the careful facade. Sir William made certain promises a gentleman would be expected to honor, and yet he was killed before he could do so, Miss Marple observed. How unfortunate. Mrs. Farrington's eyes narrowed. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with his death, you're gravely mistaken. I had everything to gain from William remaining alive. As Miss Marple left Mrs. Farrington's cottage, she reflected on this new information. The widow's admission about the nature of her relationship with Sir William added yet another thread to the increasingly complex tapestry of motives and opportunities. That evening, Miss Marple received an unexpected visitor. Patricia Bennet appeared at her door, her expression a mixture of determination and anxiety. I need your advice, Miss Marple, she said without preamble. The police are focusing on Charles again. They found something in Sir William's study, a document that suggests Charles was in serious financial difficulty. They're claiming it gives him an even stronger motive. I see. And is it true? Was Charles experiencing financial problems? Patricia hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. He made some unwise investments, but that doesn't make him a murderer. Besides, killing Sir William wouldn't solve his immediate problems. The estate is complex. It would take months to settle. Unless there were other assets, Miss Marple suggested. More liquid funds that might be accessed quickly. A flash of alarm crossed Patricia's face. What are you suggesting? Simply that Inspector Craddock will consider all possibilities, my dear, including whether anyone else might have had reason to see Sir William dead. Patricia's voice dropped to a near whisper. You mean me, don't you? Because of that wretched tapestry and the old grievance between our families. The police must investigate all angles, Miss Marple replied gently, though I suspect the truth may lie in unexpected quarters. After Patricia left, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching darkness fall over her garden. The case was approaching its critical point, the moment when scattered observations would coalesce into clarity. She had seen a pattern forming, a design as intricate and deliberate as the most complex knitting stitch. But one crucial thread remained elusive. The next morning, Miss Marple asked Cherry to deliver a note to Inspector Craddock, requesting his presence at her cottage that afternoon on a matter of urgency. She then made a telephone call to Dr. Haydock, inquiring casually about his niece's plans. Eliza? She's still at my house, though not happily. The inspector has forbidden her to leave the village until further notice. How inconvenient for her. London must seem very distant at present. Indeed, though she's been keeping busy, studying some art reference books I had in my library, making telephone calls to her gallery, keeping up appearances, I suppose. Appearances can be so important, Miss Marple agreed, especially in matters of art. When Inspector Craddock arrived at 3 o'clock, Miss Marple was ready. She had arranged her sitting room with careful precision, her knitting basket beside her chair, a small table set with tea and biscuits, and a folded newspaper placed casually on the side table.
You mentioned an urgent matter.
Craddock inquired, accepting a cup of tea. Yes, Inspector. I believe I may have realized something about the case. Something that connects several seemingly disparate elements. I'm all ears, Miss Marple. She set down her teacup deliberately. It concerns 3 things. Sir William's art collection, his planned donation to the Church Restoration Fund, and the letter found partially burned in his fireplace. Go on. Sir William was known to be an avid collector, particularly of English landscapes, but according to Eliza Haydock, at least one piece in his collection was not authentic, a supposed early constable that she identified as a Victorian reproduction. And you think this is connected to his murder? I believe it might be, yes. Especially when one considers that Sir William was planning to donate a substantial sum to the church fund, a donation he apparently hadn't discussed with his nephew. Craddock's expression sharpened with interest. You're suggesting financial difficulties, but our investigations show the Hargreaves estate was quite solvent, despite Charles's personal investments. Not difficulties with the estate itself, perhaps, but with certain assets Sir William believed he possessed. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her fingers working steadily as she spoke. Inspector, have you had experts examine Sir William's art collection since his death? Not yet. We've been focused on the immediate crime scene and establishing timelines. I wonder if it might be worthwhile to do so, particularly if one considers the possibility that the constable landscape wasn't the only piece of questionable authenticity in his collection. Understanding dawned in Craddock's eyes. You're suggesting a systematic fraud, but who would have the expertise to carry out such a scheme? Miss Marple smiled gently. Someone with credentials in art authentication, perhaps. Someone who could gradually replace valuable originals with high-quality reproductions, selling the authentic pieces without the owner's knowledge. Eliza Haydock, Craddock said slowly, but surely Sir William would notice such substitutions in his own collection. Not necessarily. The replacements would be excellent copies. And Sir William, though proud of his collection, was not a trained expert. He relied on the opinions of those he considered qualified. But if he discovered such a deception, Craddock trailed off. The implications clear. Precisely, Miss Marple nodded. And if one adds the complication of a promised marriage that might give a new wife access to his financial affairs, the letter to Mrs. Farrington, Craddock concluded. If Sir William was planning to marry, an audit of his assets might follow. Any discrepancies in his collection would be exposed. It presents a rather urgent problem for someone who had been systematically defrauding him, Miss Marple agreed. A problem that might require drastic resolution. Craddock stood abruptly. I need to speak with Eliza Haydock immediately, and arrange for an art expert to examine that collection. There's one more thing, Inspector, Miss Marple said as he prepared to leave. The impersonation of Sir William after his speech. It would require someone familiar with his mannerisms. Yes, but also someone of similar build and height, someone who could move about the hall without attracting undue attention. You have someone specific in mind? I observed Charles Hargreaves throughout that evening. Inspector, he was never absent from the main room long enough to have committed the murder, and returned. But there was someone else who disappeared for a significant period around the crucial time. Who? Miss Marple's eyes met his with quiet certainty. Perhaps you should ask Dr. Haydock about his niece's theatrical background. I understand she was quite accomplished in university productions, and with the right padding, the subdued lighting, Craddock's expression hardened with resolve. Miss Marple, I believe we need to accelerate this investigation. Would you be willing to assist me in setting a small trap? If it will help reveal the truth, Inspector, I would be most willing indeed. Inspector Craddock's plan was simple, but effective. He would inform key individuals that a thorough examination of Sir William's art collection was scheduled for the following morning. An expert from London would assess each piece, particularly focusing on several valuable landscapes. The announcement, strategically shared, would serve as bait for anyone with reason to fear such scrutiny. Miss Marple agreed to host a small gathering at her cottage. That evening, tea and cake with Mrs. Bantry, Dr. Haydock and his niece. The inspector would join them later, ostensibly to provide an update on the investigation. A natural social setting might encourage unguarded comments, Craddock explained. And your presence, Miss Marple, often seems to inspire candor in others. People rarely notice an elderly lady observing from the corner. she agreed with a modest smile. By 5 o'clock, Miss Marple's sitting room had been arranged for visitors. Cherry had prepared a Victoria sponge and cucumber sandwiches, and the best china was set out on a lace tablecloth. Dr. Haydock arrived first, accompanied by a clearly reluctant Eliza. The young woman's sophisticated demeanor showed signs of strain, slight shadows beneath her eyes, a certain tightness around her mouth. "How kind of you to invite us, Miss Marple," Dr. Haydock said warmly. "Eliza has been feeling rather confined these past few days. Village life must seem very limiting after London," Miss Marple observed sympathetically. "Suffocating would be a more accurate description," Eliza replied with a tight smile. "Though my uncle's company is always a compensation." Mrs. Bantry arrived moments later, bringing with her a flurry of news and speculation. "They're saying Charles may be charged after all. Something about new evidence from Sir William's papers, and Patricia Bennet has been questioned again. She was seen leaving the police station in tears this morning." "How distressing," Miss Marple murmured, pouring tea. "One hopes the truth will emerge quickly, for everyone's sake." "Indeed," Dr. Haydock agreed. "These suspicions hanging over the village are taking a toll on everyone. Even my patients are affected. Mrs. Ellison's blood pressure has risen alarmingly since the murder." As conversation flowed around general village topics, Miss Marple observed Eliza carefully. The younger woman participated minimally, her attention seeming to drift until Mrs. Bantry mentioned the art collection. "I hear they're bringing in some expert from London tomorrow to examine Sir William's paintings," Mrs. Bantry announced. "Apparently there's some question about their authenticity." Eliza's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Really? That seems an odd priority in a murder investigation." "Not necessarily," Dr. Haydock considered. "If there's any question about the value of the estate, it could relate to motive. But surely Sir William's collection is well documented," Eliza said carefully. "He was quite meticulous about such things. Documentation can be misleading," Miss Marple observed mildly, "especially when dealing with art. Reproductions can be remarkably convincing to the untrained eye. That's why authentication from qualified experts is so important," Eliza agreed, her composure restored. "Though even experts can disagree about attribution and provenance, like your disagreement with Sir William over the Constable landscape?" Miss Marple inquired innocently. A flicker of surprise crossed Eliza's face. "Yes, exactly. Sir William was convinced he'd acquired an early Constable, but certain technical elements clearly identified it as a later reproduction. Excellent quality, but definitely not authentic." "How disappointing for him," Mrs. Bantry sympathized. "Was it a recent acquisition?" "About 2 years ago, I believe," Eliza replied. "Before I became involved with his collection." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "Involved? I didn't realize you had a professional relationship with Sir William's collection." Eliza hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "It was very informal. When I visited Uncle Edward, Sir William occasionally asked my opinion on pieces he was considering. Given my background in authentication, it was a natural courtesy. How fortunate for him to have access to such expertise." Miss Marple smiled. "Though I imagine it must have been difficult when your professional judgment conflicted with his wishes." "Sir William could be stubborn about his possessions," Eliza acknowledged. "He preferred to believe what enhanced their value." The arrival of Inspector Craddock temporarily shifted the conversation. He accepted tea and cake with professional courtesy, his manner giving no indication of their earlier discussion. "Any progress with your investigation, Inspector?" Dr. Haydock inquired. "We're pursuing several promising avenues," Craddock replied non-committally, "including a thorough examination of Sir William's business affairs and personal assets, such as the art collection," Mrs. Bantry supplied eagerly. "We were just discussing it." "Indeed." Craddock's gaze settled briefly on Eliza. "We've arranged for an expert from the National Gallery to assess each piece tomorrow morning. Apparently there may be questions about the authenticity of several important works." "Which ones?" Eliza asked, her tone casual, though Miss Marple noted her fingers tightening around her teacup. "I believe the Turner seascape is of particular interest," Craddock replied, "and the Gainsborough portrait in the main hall." "The Gainsborough is certainly authentic," Eliza said with professional confidence. "It's been in the Hargreaves family for generations. Well-documented provenance." "And the Turner?" Miss Marple inquired. "I'm less familiar with that piece," Eliza admitted. though Turner's technique is quite distinctive. Any competent expert should be able to verify it. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Miss Marple noticed Eliza growing increasingly distracted. Twice she checked her wristwatch, and her responses became more perfunctory as the evening progressed. As the gathering concluded, Eliza was first to rise. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Miss Marple. If you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make to my gallery in London." "Of course, my dear. Professional responsibilities don't pause for village tragedies, do they?" After the guests departed, Inspector Craddock lingered, his expression thoughtful. She was unsettled by the news of the art examination. Quite visibly, Miss Marple agreed, particularly regarding the Turner seascape. "Did you notice her qualification? Any competent expert should be able to verify it." A curious phrasing, suggestive of concern about the examination's outcome. Craddock nodded. "I've arranged for surveillance on Dr. Haydock's cottage tonight. If Miss Haydock attempts to leave or contact anyone, we'll know." "I suspect she will, Inspector. There's a nervousness about her that goes beyond mere impatience with village life." "We'll see," Craddock said grimly. "The art expert is actually arriving tonight, staying at the hotel in Much Benham. The examination will begin first thing tomorrow." After the inspector left, Miss Marple retired to her bedroom, though sleep eluded her. Her mind continued sorting through the evidence, both observed and deduced. There was something about the case that still troubled her, a loose thread in the pattern that suggested a more complex design than even she had initially perceived. She was awakened before dawn by the telephone's shrill ring. It was Inspector Craddock, his voice tense with urgency. "Miss Marple." Eliza Haydock left her uncle's house shortly after midnight. Officers followed her to the old hall, where she used a key to enter through a side door. When they moved to apprehend her, she fled into the grounds. "We're searching now, but I thought you should know she was carrying what appeared to be a small painting." "The Turner seascape," Miss Marple said with quiet certainty. "Most likely. I'm heading to the old hall now. I'll keep you informed." The village hummed with excitement by mid-morning. News of Eliza Haydock's nighttime intrusion at the old hall and subsequent disappearance spread rapidly. Search parties combed the extensive estate grounds and neighboring woods, while roadblocks were established on major routes out of the area. Miss Marple was tending to her garden, a task that allowed both physical activity and mental contemplation, when she noticed a familiar figure approaching her gate. Patricia Bennet looked haggard, her usual polish diminished by evident strain. "Is it true?" Patricia demanded without greeting. "About Eliza Haydock and the paintings?" "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple replied calmly. "I believe the police are investigating that possibility, yes." "Then it wasn't Charles," Patricia said, her relief palpable. "He's been released again. The inspector told him they're now pursuing a different suspect. That must be a great comfort to you both." Patricia sank onto the garden bench, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's been a nightmare. First the accusations against Charles, then the questions about my own relationship with Sir William, as if I had anything to gain from his death, except perhaps Charles's freedom to make his own decisions," Miss Marple observed mildly. "About the estate, and about his personal life." Patricia's gaze sharpened. "What exactly are you implying?" "Simply that Sir William's influence over his nephew was considerable. His approval or disapproval of Charles's choices carried significant weight." "That's true enough," Patricia acknowledged after a moment. "Sir William made no secret of his hopes that Charles would marry appropriately, meaning someone from his own social circle. He considered me too progressive in my views. And yet you and Charles grew close, despite Sir William's reservations." "We tried to be discreet. Though in a village this size," Patricia shrugged helplessly. "Indeed, privacy is a rare commodity in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple deadheaded a fading rose with precise snips. "I understand you may have known Eliza Haydock before her recent visit. We met briefly years ago, when she and Charles were engaged," Patricia admitted. "It was a society event in London. I barely remember it. She certainly didn't remember me when she arrived for the harvest ball." "Or pretended not to," Miss Marple suggested. "People often find it convenient to forget uncomfortable encounters." Patricia stood abruptly. "I should go. Charles is waiting at the hall. The police want to interview him again about Eliza, their past relationship, whether he knew anything about her involvement with the art collection. As Patricia hurried away, Miss Marple continued her gardening, though her thoughts were far from her roses. The case was approaching its resolution, yet that troubling loose thread remained. Something about the timing, perhaps, or a detail observed but not yet connected to the larger pattern. By afternoon, the search for Eliza Haydock had expanded to neighboring villages. Inspector Craddock telephoned with an update. The art expert's preliminary examination confirmed that at least 3 valuable pieces in Sir William's collection had been replaced with high-quality reproductions. The original Turner seascape was indeed missing. It appears to have been a systematic fraud, Craddock explained, gradually replacing originals with forgeries, selling the authentic pieces on the black market. The expert estimates the total value of the missing originals at over £50,000. A significant sum, Miss Marple agreed, and a powerful motive for murder when discovery threatened. We've contacted galleries in London. It seems Miss Haydock's professional reputation was under strain. Financial difficulties, whispers about questionable authentications. This scheme likely provided funds to maintain her lifestyle while re-establishing her credentials. And Sir William discovered the deception, Miss Marple concluded. We believe so. Yes, perhaps not the full extent, but enough to raise serious questions. His murder prevented a complete investigation that would have exposed the fraud and implicated Eliza. Yet despite the seemingly straightforward case against Eliza Haydock, something continued to trouble Miss Marple. That evening, as she sat knitting by the window, watching darkness settle over her garden, a sudden realization struck her. The blue baby blanket slipped from her lap as she rose quickly, moving to her telephone. Inspector, I believe I've remembered something important. Something that may change our understanding of the case entirely. Go on, Miss Marple. It concerns the evening of the ball. Specifically, the moment Sir William gave his speech. You recall I mentioned noticing his cufflinks? Yes, the ruby ones that were missing when he was seen later, suggesting impersonation. Precisely. But what I failed to mention, what I've only just recalled clearly, is that I also observed Charles Hargreaves during the speech, and later, during that period, when someone impersonated Sir William. And, Craddock prompted, his tone sharpening with interest. Charles was speaking with Dr. Haydock throughout Sir William's speech, and afterward, during the critical period, when the impersonation must have occurred, Charles remained in clear view in the ballroom. He couldn't possibly have been the one impersonating his uncle. Then who? That's the question, isn't it? If Charles was visible in the ballroom, and Eliza was observed dancing with him around that time, then neither of them could have impersonated Sir William or committed the murder during that window, Craddock concluded grimly. Which means we should reconsider our list of suspects, Inspector, particularly those who had reason to fear Sir William's continued influence over his nephew, over village affairs, or over certain financial arrangements. After hanging up, Miss Marple moved to her bureau drawer and extracted a small notebook. In it she had recorded her observations from the Harvest Ball times, movements, snippets of conversation. She reviewed these notes carefully, paying particular attention to one detail she had noted, but not previously connected to the murder, a brief exchange overheard between Patricia Bennet and Reverend Clement, just before Sir William's speech. The donation announcement, he's reconsidered, Patricia had said, her tone urgent. But the paperwork is prepared, the vicar had replied, clearly distressed. The funds are desperately needed. I'm sorry, Leonard. He was most adamant. Recent developments have caused him to reassess his commitments. Miss Marple closed the notebook thoughtfully. Sir William's planned donation to the Church Restoration Fund, a substantial sum, according to Mrs. Clement, had apparently been withdrawn at the last moment, and Patricia Bennet had been the messenger of this unwelcome news. But why would Sir William withdraw a promised donation, and how did this relate to the art fraud perpetrated by Eliza Haydock? The answer came to Miss Marple like the final stitch in a complex pattern, completing the design with sudden clarity. She reached for the telephone once more. Inspector Craddock needed this information immediately, before Eliza Haydock was apprehended and the case considered closed. Because if Miss Marple's new theory was correct, Eliza's flight was not an admission of guilt for murder, but fear of being framed for a crime she hadn't committed. and the true killer remained in St. Mary Mead, perhaps already planning to eliminate any remaining threats to their freedom. Inspector Craddock arrived at Miss Marple's cottage just after 9 the following morning, his expression grave. "We found the Turner seascape," he announced without preamble, "hidden in the boathouse on the old Hall property, and we've located Eliza Haydock. She's being brought in from Much Benham, where she apparently took a room at the Green Dragon Inn under an assumed name." "I see," Miss Marple replied calmly. "And did you consider the information I shared last night about the timing?" "I did." Craddock removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "It presents a complication." "Certainly. If neither Charles nor Eliza could have impersonated Sir William during that crucial time period, then we must look elsewhere for our murderer," Miss Marple concluded. "Someone equally motivated to silence Sir William, though perhaps for different reasons." The inspector nodded slowly. "I've been reviewing witness statements. Several people observed Patricia Bennet entering the corridor leading to Sir William's study shortly before the body was discovered. And yet it was a young server who first found the body, according to Mrs. Bantry. Yes, though Patricia was immediately behind him. She summoned help while the boy apparently went into shock." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked thoughtfully. "One wonders why Patricia would have been heading toward the study at that particular moment. She claimed she was looking for more port for the head table. A reasonable explanation," Miss Marple acknowledged. "Though the timing is interesting, isn't it? Just when someone might have wanted to discover a body that had been dead for some time." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting Patricia Bennet murdered Sir William?" "I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities, Inspector, including complicated ones." Miss Marple set her knitting aside. "Have you spoken with Mrs. Farrington since our discussion yesterday?" "Briefly. She confirmed receiving a letter from Sir William the day before the ball, postponing their arrangement. Apparently, he cited unforeseen complications that required his attention. Complications such as discovering that valuable art pieces in his collection had been replaced with forgeries," Miss Marple mused. "A discovery that might prompt a thorough audit of his assets and postponement of personal commitments until such matters were resolved." "That aligns with our current theory," Craddock agreed. "But there's something we haven't fully considered, Inspector. If Sir William discovered the art fraud, why not confront Eliza immediately? Why wait until the night of the harvest ball? Perhaps he wasn't certain of her involvement, or needed time to gather evidence. Or perhaps," Miss Marple suggested quietly, "he wasn't aware of who was truly responsible." Craddock frowned. "You're not suggesting. I'm suggesting that we've been too quick to assume Eliza Haydock acted alone in this matter. Art fraud on this scale would require connections, someone to identify potential buyers for the stolen originals, someone with access to the house when Eliza wasn't present. An accomplice," Craddock said slowly. "Someone here in the village. Someone with a vested interest in Sir William's art collection. Someone familiar with his habits and schedule." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "Someone who visits the old hall regularly." Understanding dawned in Craddock's eyes. Patricia Bennet. As chairwoman of the village events committee, she would have legitimate reasons to be at the hall, discussing arrangements with Sir William, and as Charles's friend, she would have additional opportunities to move about the house without arousing suspicion. Miss Marple added, "But what's her connection to the art fraud?" "Patricia Bennet is no art expert." "No, but she was in London 3 years ago, before returning to St. Mary Mead, and Eliza Haydock has been established in the London art world for some time." Craddock stood abruptly. "I need to verify Patricia's London address during that period, and check if there's any record of contact between her and Eliza Haydock. You might also inquire about the financial arrangements for the community centre project Patricia has been championing," Miss Marple suggested. Significant funds would be required for such an undertaking. After the inspector departed, Miss Marple remained in her chair, her knitting forgotten as she pieced together the final elements of the pattern she'd been observing. The relationship between Patricia and Charles, Sir William's disapproval, the art fraud, the cancelled donation to the church fund, all threads in a complex tapestry of deception and betrayal. That afternoon, as Miss Marple was pruning her late roses, she received an unexpected visitor. Charles Hargreaves appeared at her garden gate, his handsome face drawn with strain, yet showing determined purpose. Miss Marple, he greeted her, his voice low. May I speak with you privately? Of course, Mr. Hargreaves. Would you care to join me in the garden? It's quite pleasant in the afternoon sun. As they settled on the wrought iron bench beneath the aging apple tree, Charles spoke with quiet intensity. Inspector Craddock mentioned that you've provided several insights into my uncle's murder. He also indicated that recent developments may shift suspicion away from Eliza. The inspector is very thorough in his investigations, Miss Marple replied carefully. He questioned me this morning about Patricia, her activities in London before returning to St. Mary Mead, her involvement with the Hall, our relationship. Charles hesitated. I'm concerned, Miss Marple. Patricia has been acting strangely since they arrested Eliza. Anxious. Secretive. She's cancelled our dinner plans twice, claiming headaches. People respond differently to stress, Mr. Hargreaves. It's more than that. Charles leaned forward, his voice dropping further. Last night, I found Patricia in my uncle's study, going through his personal papers. She claimed she was looking for documents related to the Harvest Ball expenses, but the drawer she was searching contained my uncle's private correspondence. How interesting, Miss Marple murmured. Did you mention this to Inspector Craddock? Not yet. I wanted to understand before making accusations. His expression grew troubled. Miss Marple, I cared deeply for Patricia. We've planned a future together, something my uncle opposed. But if she's involved in his death somehow, the truth can be painful, Mr. Hargreaves, yet concealing it rarely brings peace. Charles nodded slowly. There's something else. Something I haven't told the police. He extracted a folded paper from his pocket. I found this in Patricia's handbag this morning, while looking for her headache tablets. It's a receipt from a London gallery for the sale of a painting, a significant amount. Miss Marple examined the document carefully. The gallery's name meant nothing to her, but the amount, £8,000, was indeed substantial. The date on the receipt was 3 months prior. Have you asked Patricia about this? I haven't had the opportunity. She left early this morning for a meeting with the community centre committee. But Miss Marple, Patricia doesn't own valuable artwork. Her family's finances have been strained since her father's investments failed. Yet she returned to St. Mary Mead 3 years ago and purchased Rose Cottage. Miss Marple observed. A charming property, but not inexpensive. She said she'd inherited money from a godmother. Charles replied, doubt now evident in his voice. I never questioned it. We often accept explanations that align with our hopes. Mr. Hargreaves. It's a very human tendency. As Charles departed, his shoulders bowed with the weight of suspicion. Miss Marple returned to her gardening with renewed purpose. The pattern was nearly complete now, a design more intricate than even she had initially perceived. That evening, the telephone rang as Miss Marple was preparing for bed. It was Inspector Craddock, his voice charged with suppressed excitement. We found something, Miss Marple. Financial records linking Patricia Bennet to a gallery in Kensington. The same gallery suspected of handling several of the stolen originals from Sir William's collection. And there's more. During her time in London, Patricia lived in the same apartment building as Eliza Haydock. Not just the same building, the same floor. Suggesting a prior acquaintance, Miss Marple nodded, though the inspector couldn't see the gesture. More than an acquaintance, I suspect. We've obtained records of numerous phone calls between them over the past 3 years, including several in the weeks leading up to the Harvest Ball. Then the art fraud was a joint enterprise, Miss Marple concluded. Eliza providing the expertise to identify valuable pieces and create convincing reproductions. Patricia furnishing access to the collection and facilitating the substitution. That's our current theory, yes, but it doesn't entirely explain the murder. If Sir William discovered the fraud, why kill him? Why not simply flee? Perhaps because fleeing would mean abandoning other plans, Miss Marple suggested. Plans involving the Hargreaves estate. Charles, Craddock said with sudden understanding. Patricia's relationship with Charles gave her a path to long-term financial security, if Sir William's influence could be removed, and if certain aspects of her past remained concealed, Miss Marple added. A past that Sir William might have discovered along with the art fraud. We're bringing Patricia Bennet in for questioning tomorrow morning, Craddock informed her. Given these developments, I'd appreciate your presence during the interview, Miss Marple. Your insights have proven invaluable. Of course, Inspector. Though there's one aspect of this case we haven't fully addressed. The impersonation of Sir William after his speech. If neither Eliza nor Charles could have performed that role, then it must have been Patricia herself, Craddock concluded. She's approximately the right height, and with suitable padding, indeed. And in the subdued lighting, moving among a crowd of guests already affected by wine and celebration, such an impersonation might succeed, especially if brief and carefully managed. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn's golden light illuminating St. Mary Mead, as Miss Marple made her way to the police station. Inspector Craddock greeted her with professional courtesy, escorting her to a small observation room adjacent to the interview space. Patricia Bennett arrived 10 minutes ago, he informed her. Not voluntarily, we had to send officers to Rose Cottage. She seemed prepared for their arrival. Not surprising, Miss Marple nodded. She's an intelligent woman. The discovery of the gallery receipt by Charles would have alerted her that suspicions were growing. Through the one-way glass, Miss Marple observed Patricia seated at the interview table. Her posture was rigid, her expression composed though strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. She wore a simple navy dress with a strand of pearls, attire more suited to a business meeting than a police interview. Craddock entered the room, accompanied by a female officer who would record the proceedings. He placed a folder on the table between them, his manner professional but not unkind. Miss Bennett, thank you for joining us this morning. I have some questions regarding your relationship with Sir William Hargreaves and certain financial matters that have come to our attention. Patricia's smile was brittle. I've already provided statements about my whereabouts during the harvest ball, Inspector. I'm not sure what else I can contribute. This concerns events before the ball, Miss Bennett. Specifically, your involvement with Sir William's art collection and your association with Eliza Haydock. A flicker of something alarm, resignation, crossed Patricia's features before her composure reasserted itself. I'm not sure what you mean by involvement with the collection. As for Eliza Haydock, I barely know her. We met briefly years ago at a London event. And yet telephone records show dozens of calls between your numbers over the past 3 years. Craddock countered, removing a document from his folder, including 3 calls on the day before the harvest ball. Patricia's silence was more revealing than any protestation could have been. We've also identified financial transactions linking you to a gallery in Kensington, a gallery suspected of handling stolen artwork. Craddock placed another document before her, including this receipt for £8,000, dated 3 months ago. I don't have to answer these accusations, Patricia said, her voice suddenly cold. I want a solicitor. That's certainly your right, Craddock acknowledged. Before we contact one, however, I should inform you that Eliza Haydock is currently providing a detailed statement about your joint enterprise. It seems Miss Haydock is quite eager to clarify her role in matters, particularly regarding Sir William's murder. This was not entirely true. Eliza had been interviewed separately, but had not yet implicated Patricia in the murder. But the tactic had its intended effect. Patricia's composure cracked visibly. Eliza had nothing to do with his death, she said quickly. The art scheme was her idea. Yes, but murder wasn't part of the plan. That was necessary improvisation. In the observation room, Miss Marple nodded to herself. The pattern was complete. Why don't you tell us about this improvisation, Miss Bennett? Craddock suggested quietly. Patricia's shoulders sagged slightly, resignation replacing defiance. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Sir William wasn't meant to discover the substitutions, not until after he'd changed his will in Charles's favour, and I was established at the Hall. As Charles's wife, Craddock supplied. Eventually, yes. Sir William opposed our relationship. He had ridiculous aspirations for Charles to marry into some fading aristocratic family. But I knew Charles would choose me once his uncle's influence was removed. So the art fraud was meant to provide funds, while you secured your position. Patricia's laugh held no humour. The art fraud was meant to provide the funds I needed to restart my life, after my father's disgrace. Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything, to watch your family name become synonymous with financial ruin? Your father's investment scandal, Craddock nodded. That affected the Hargreaves family assets as well. I understand. Sir William never forgave him, or by extension me. When I returned to St. Mary Mead, He made his disapproval of my friendship with Charles abundantly clear. Patricia's voice hardened. But I had every right to happiness, to security. The art scheme was elegant. Eliza identified valuable pieces that wouldn't be missed immediately, created perfect reproductions, and I facilitated the substitutions during committee meetings at the hall. The originals were sold through her gallery connection. And Sir William discovered the deception. Not initially, but he decided to have the collection appraised for insurance purposes. Standard procedure for preparing his will, apparently. The appraisal would have exposed everything. "So you killed him," Craddock stated flatly. Patricia's expression remained defiant. "I protected my future." Sir William was going to announce at the ball that he was changing his will, cutting Charles's inheritance if he continued our relationship. He'd already cancelled his donation to the Church Restoration Fund. Because I was chairing the committee. He was systematically undermining everything I'd worked for. "Tell me about the night of the murder," Craddock prompted. "It was almost laughably simple," Patricia said, a hint of pride entering her tone. "I knew Sir William always retired to his study briefly after dinner to collect his thoughts before his speech. I followed him, carrying papers about the community centre, a legitimate reason for seeking a private word. He was at his desk, his back to the door. The heavy candlestick was right there on the side table. One blow was all it took. And the letter opener. A necessary detail. Everyone knew Sir William kept it on display. It made a convenient murder weapon that implicated no one specifically. I took it from the library display earlier that day, but the body wasn't discovered until later," Craddock noted. After Sir William supposedly gave his speech. Patricia's smile was cold. "That was the clever part. I took his notes from his pocket, left the study, and locked it with the key I'd had copied months ago. During dinner, I excused myself and retrieved the padding and jacket I'd hidden in a storage closet. Sir William and I are of similar height. With the padding and in the dimmed lighting, the impersonation was sufficient for a brief appearance. I gave his speech word for word. I'd helped him prepare it after all, and then retired to a quiet corner before slipping away to remove the disguise, and later arranged for the body to be discovered," Craddock concluded. "I suggested to young Thomas, the server, that we needed more port from Sir William's private stock in the study. I knew he'd enter first protocol for service staff. His reaction to the body was entirely genuine. Poor boy. Nearly fainted." Patricia's composure finally cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't personal, Inspector. Sir William simply represented an obstacle to everything I deserved. Respectability, security, position. After what my family endured, was that really too much to ask?" In the observation room, Miss Marple sighed softly. Human nature remained depressingly constant in its capacity for self-justification. The desire for social redemption, financial security, and revenge, age-old motives dressed in modern clothing. As Patricia Bennet was formally charged with the murder of Sir William Hargreaves, Miss Marple reflected on the intricate pattern of deception that had nearly succeeded. The art fraud might never have been discovered if Sir William hadn't decided to have his collection appraised. Patricia might have secured her position as Charles's wife, eventually controlling the Hargreaves estate that her father's failures had once damaged. Yet, as so often happened, a small detail had unraveled the entire scheme. In this case, a pair of ruby cufflinks, observed by an elderly lady with a lifetime's practice in noting the small inconsistencies in human behavior. That evening, as Miss Marple sat knitting in her garden, enjoying the last warm days of autumn, she received a visit from Dr. Haydock. The physician looked weary, the strain of recent events evident in his face. "Eliza has been charged as an accessory," he informed her, without preamble. "Not to the murder, thankfully, but to the fraud. She'll likely face prison time." "I'm sorry, Edward," Miss Marple said gently. "Family disappointments are particularly painful. The irony is that her career was genuinely promising. Her expertise is real. She simply chose to use it inappropriately." Dr. Haydock shook his head sadly. "Pride and ambition, such common human failings, yet so destructive. And Charles Hargreaves? How is he bearing up? As well as can be expected. The double betrayal by Patricia and by his own judgment has hit him hard. He blames himself for not seeing through her machinations. We often see what we wish to see in those we care for," Miss Marple observed. It's not a failing unique to youth. As darkness fell over St. Mary Mead, the village gradually absorbed this latest chapter in its long history. Gossip would continue for months. Of course, theories and embellishments added with each retelling. But life would resume its rhythm, as it always did. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, the blue baby blanket nearing completion. Human nature remained consistent in its complexities and contradictions, a pattern she had observed and interpreted throughout her long life. In this case, as in so many others, the truth had lain not in elaborate theories or foreign intrigue, but in the familiar interplay of pride, greed, and the desperate desire to maintain appearances at any cost. The true mystery, she reflected, was not why such crimes occurred, but why people continued to believe they could conceal the essential truth of their nature from those who truly observed them. 3 days after Patricia Bennett's formal charging, St. Mary Mead was slowly beginning to return to its normal rhythms. The initial shock had given way to intense discussion in the village shop, at the vicarage tea gatherings, and across garden fences, each conversation adding layers of speculation and hindsight wisdom. "I always thought there was something not quite right about her," Mrs. Ellison declared to anyone who would listen at the post office. "Too polished, too perfect, and the way she ingratiated herself with the village committees within months of arriving, most transparent." Miss Marple, collecting her weekly pension, merely smiled politely at such pronouncements. Human memory was remarkably elastic, reshaping itself to accommodate new information while conveniently forgetting previous admiration or trust. The morning papers had covered the case extensively, the more sensational ones emphasizing the art fraud angle and Patricia's social climbing ambitions. The local gazette took a more restrained approach, focusing on Sir William's community contributions and the tragic betrayal by someone he had welcomed into his social circle, despite family history. Miss Marple was pruning her late-blooming roses when Inspector Craddock's car pulled up outside her gate. His expression as he approached suggested professional concern rather than a social call. "Good morning, Inspector," she greeted him. "You look troubled." "Good morning, Miss Marple." "I am rather." He glanced around the garden. "Might we speak privately?" Inside her cottage, with tea served in her best china cups, Craddock revealed the cause of his concern. "We've encountered a complication in the case against Patricia Bennett. Her solicitor has raised a potentially significant issue with the timeline we established."
Ah?
"What sort of issue?" "It concerns Sir William's actual time of death. Dr. Haydock's initial estimation placed it between 9:15 and 9:45 p.m., during or shortly after the speech Patricia gave while impersonating him." "Yes, I recall. A more detailed post-mortem analysis has narrowed that window considerably. The pathologist now believes Sir William died closer to 8:45 p.m., before the speech, not after or during it." Miss Marple set down her teacup with deliberate care. "I see. And this contradicts Patricia's confession?" "Partially. She admitted striking Sir William before dinner and the speech, but claimed he died from that blow. If he was actually alive longer than she realized, then someone else might have entered the study afterward," Miss Marple completed the thought. "Someone who delivered the fatal stab wound with the letter opener." Craddock nodded grimly. "Exactly. Patricia's solicitor is already preparing to argue that she's guilty only of assault, not murder, that someone else killed Sir William after she left him unconscious. A convenient defense," Miss Marple observed, "though not implausible, given this new timeline. Patricia herself seems genuinely confused by the discrepancy. She insists Sir William wasn't breathing when she left the study, that she checked specifically to ensure he was dead. The human pulse can be difficult to detect in certain circumstances," Miss Marple noted, "especially for someone untrained and under extreme stress." "True, but if she's telling the truth about this part, then someone else entered that locked study before the body was discovered." Craddock's frustration was evident. Someone with another key, or another means of access. Miss Marple considered this new information carefully. The letter opener, was it inserted with significant force? According to the pathologist, yes. Considerable strength was required, especially given the angle, suggesting a strong individual, perhaps male? Possibly, though a determined woman could have managed it. Miss Marple's knitting needles resumed their rhythmic clicking. One wonders who else had reason to ensure Sir William's death that evening. Who might have discovered him unconscious and seized the opportunity to finish what Patricia had begun? Charles Hargreaves is the obvious candidate, Craddock acknowledged reluctantly. He inherits everything, and he certainly had the physical capability, but his alibi for the critical period seems solid. Multiple witnesses place him in the ballroom continuously from dinner until the body's discovery. And Eliza Haydock, where was she during this revised time frame? According to several witnesses, dancing with Charles for most of the evening, though there was apparently a brief period when she excused herself, claimed she needed fresh air. But that was later, closer to when the body was found. I see. Miss Marple's expression remained thoughtful. Have you spoken with Mrs. Farrington since this development? The widow, briefly. She seems genuinely devastated by Sir William's death. Apparently she'd received a note from him the morning of the ball, hand-delivered by his chauffeur, suggesting they might meet privately later that evening to resolve certain matters. Interesting, Miss Marple murmured, especially given his cancellation of their arrangement the previous day. She interpreted it as a reconciliation attempt. Claims she was waiting near the garden terrace at the appointed time, 10:30 p.m., that Sir William never appeared. Naturally not, as he was already dead by then. Miss Marple set her knitting aside. Inspector, I wonder if we might be overlooking something. The revised timeline suggests Sir William was struck unconscious by Patricia, but actually died from the stab wound delivered later. What if the letter opener wasn't brought to the study by Patricia at all? What if it was already there? Craddock frowned. The housekeeper was quite clear that the letter opener was normally kept in the library display case. Under normal circumstances, yes. But consider if Sir William had arranged to meet Mrs. Farrington privately that evening, might he not have retrieved a significant family item beforehand, perhaps intending it as a gesture of some kind? You're suggesting Sir William himself brought the letter opener to the study? It seems plausible. A family heirloom, symbolic of the Hargreaves' heritage he valued so deeply. If he intended a meaningful conversation with Mrs. Farrington about their future, but that still doesn't explain who stabbed him with it after Patricia left. No, Miss Marple agreed. Though it might narrow our field of consideration to those who knew of his planned meeting with Mrs. Farrington, or who might have intercepted his note to her. After Craddock departed, Miss Marple remained in her chair, her mind sorting through the new possibilities this timeline revision presented. The case had seemed complete with Patricia's confession, yet this medical evidence suggested a more complex scenario, one involving not just premeditated assault, but opportunistic completion of the murder by another hand. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a slightly longer route for her daily constitutional, one that led past Mrs. Farrington's cottage in the new development. The widow was in her front garden, deadheading late dahlias with more vigor than precision. Miss Marple, she greeted, straightening with a wince. How nice to see you. I was just passing and thought I'd inquire how you're bearing up, my dear. Such dreadful revelations about poor Sir William's death. Mrs. Farrington's composure wavered momentarily. Dreadful indeed. To think that woman planned it all so carefully. The fraud, the impersonation, everything. One feels quite violated by such deception.
Indeed.
Though I understand the police are now investigating whether she might have had an accomplice in the actual murder. An accomplice. But she confessed, didn't she? To striking Sir William, yes. But medical evidence suggests he died somewhat later than she believed. Miss Marple's tone remained conversational. Such complications in these matters. Mrs. Farrington's gardening shears paused mid-snip. Are you saying someone else might have finished what she started? It appears possible. The timeline suggests Sir William was unconscious, but alive after Patricia left the study. Someone else encountered him in that state and delivered the fatal wound. How awful, Mrs. Farrington murmured, though Miss Marple noted her gaze had grown distant, calculating. Who would do such a thing? Someone with opportunity, certainly, and motive. Miss Marple bent to examine a particularly fine dahlia. I understand Sir William sent you a note the morning of the ball, suggesting a private meeting later that evening. Mrs. Farrington's surprise seemed genuine. How did you know that? The police are being very thorough in their investigation. May I ask what this meeting was to concern? Given his cancellation of your arrangement the previous day, a flush rose in the widow's cheeks. That's rather personal, Miss Marple. Of course. Though in murder investigations, personal matters often become relevant to establishing the full truth. After a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Farrington sighed. Very well. William's note suggested he wished to explain certain matters that had arisen, complications that had caused him to postpone our understanding. He implied that these issues might soon be resolved, allowing us to proceed as planned. These complications being the discovery of the art fraud, Miss Marple suggested. I assume so, though he didn't specify. William could be frustratingly vague in his communications. Mrs. Farrington's expression softened. Despite his formal manner, he was actually rather shy in personal matters. It made his courtship quite endearing. You cared for him genuinely, then? It wasn't merely a practical arrangement? Mrs. Farrington's eyes flashed with genuine indignation. Contrary to village gossip, Miss Marple, I don't pursue gentlemen for financial security. My late husband left me quite comfortably provided for. My interest in William was based on mutual companionship and shared values. I see. Forgive my directness. Miss Marple's smile was apologetic. One final question, if I may. Did you share the contents of Sir William's note with anyone? Or mention the planned meeting? A momentary hesitation. I may have mentioned it to Miss Bellinger when she delivered my dress for the ball that afternoon. But no one else. Miss Bellinger, the seamstress, who also works part-time at the old hall? Yes, that's right. She's been doing alterations for me since I moved to the village. Quite talented, if somewhat indiscreet at times. This new thread of information accompanied Miss Marple home, where she spent the evening reviewing her notes on the case. Lucy Bellinger was known in the village primarily for her skilled needlework, but also for her position as part-time lady's maid at the old hall, a role that gave her access to many private conversations and household arrangements. The following morning, Miss Marple telephoned Inspector Craddock with this potentially significant information. Miss Bellinger, he repeated. We interviewed her initially, of course, as part of the household staff, but she claimed to have been in the servants' hall throughout the evening, except when assisting female guests with minor wardrobe repairs. Did anyone verify her whereabouts during the critical period between Patricia leaving the study and the body's discovery? I'll have to check the statements, Craddock replied. But what possible motive would she have for killing Sir William? She's been with the household for years. By all accounts, a loyal employee. Loyalty can take many forms, Inspector, and sometimes extends to more than one member of a household. That afternoon, Craddock arrived at Miss Marple's cottage with a grim expression and a thin folder. You were right to question Miss Bellinger's involvement, he said without preamble. We've re-interviewed several staff members. It seems she was absent from the servants' hall for approximately 20 minutes during the precise period when Sir William must have died from the stab wound. And her explanation? She claimed she was fixing a torn hemline for one of the guests. But the guest in question, Mrs. Armitage, says the repair took no more than 5 minutes and was completed in the ladies' powder room, leaving approximately 15 unaccounted minutes, Miss Marple noted. Exactly. And there's more. Further investigation into her background reveals that Lucy Bellinger's mother was nursemaid to Charles Hargreaves when he was a child. The family connection goes back decades, suggesting a loyalty to Charles that might supersede her duty to Sir William, Miss Marple mused. But that alone wouldn't explain murder. No, but this might. Craddock extracted a document from his folder. We found this among Sir William's papers, a draft of his revised will, prepared by his solicitor the day before the murder. It includes a generous legacy for Miss Bellinger, £500 in recognition of her faithful service and discretion. Most generous, Miss Marple agreed, though not unusual for a long-time servant. The interesting part is what follows. Craddock's finger traced a paragraph. This bequest was conditional upon Miss Bellinger's continued silence regarding private matters pertaining to the family reputation. The solicitor couldn't or wouldn't elaborate on what these matters might be, suggesting Sir William was paying for her discretion about something potentially damaging. Miss Marple concluded. Something he didn't want made public, even after his death. Precisely. And there's one more detail you should know. We've confirmed that Miss Bellinger was in London the same weekend. Charles Hargreaves visited Eliza Haydock's gallery, supposedly their first meeting in years. Yet hotel records show Miss Bellinger didn't stay at the staff accommodation arranged by Sir William, but at the same hotel as Charles. suggesting she might have been facilitating their reunion, Miss Marple said thoughtfully, perhaps carrying messages between them when direct communication might have aroused Sir William's suspicion. That's our thinking. We're bringing her in for questioning this afternoon. Later that evening, Craddock telephoned with an update. Lucy Bellinger had initially maintained her innocence, insisting she had no reason to harm Sir William. But when confronted with the timeline discrepancies and evidence of her London trip, her composed facade had crumbled. She's confessed, Craddock informed Miss Marple. Though not to premeditated murder, she claims she entered the study using her service key to deliver a message to Sir William from Charles. Supposedly an apology for their earlier disagreement, she found Sir William unconscious, but still breathing. The letter opener was on his desk, and she decided to ensure he wouldn't recover. Miss Marple concluded. Yes. She claims it was an impulsive decision, made to protect Charles's future. She knew Sir William was planning to change his will, disinheriting Charles if he continued his relationship with Patricia. The new will was to be signed after the ball. A loyal servant indeed, Miss Marple murmured, taking matters into her own hands to secure her young master's inheritance. There's more to it than simple loyalty, Craddock added grimly. It seems Miss Bellinger has harbored certain aspirations regarding her relationship with Charles. Delusions, perhaps, that with Sir William's influence removed, Charles might recognize her devotion in a more personal way. Ah, Miss Marple said softly. The oldest motive of all. She's also admitted to knowing about the art fraud, not participating in it, but observing suspicious activities by both Patricia and Eliza during their visits to the hall. She chose to remain silent, believing the deception would eventually be discovered and turn Charles against Patricia. Instead, Sir William discovered it first, threatening not only the fraud itself, but potentially exposing previous connections between Patricia and Eliza that might implicate Charles. Exactly. Miss Bellinger claims she overheard Sir William telling his solicitor he had evidence suggesting Charles might have introduced the women years ago, facilitating the scheme from the beginning. Had he? Was Charles involved? We don't believe so. No. Sir William's suspicions were apparently based on a misinterpretation of certain correspondence found in Charles's desk, but the threat of such an accusation from his uncle, combined with the inheritance issue, gave Miss Bellinger what she perceived as justification for her actions. After hanging up, Miss Marple sat in her garden as twilight descended, reflecting on this final twist in the case. 3 individuals had contributed to Sir William's death, each acting from different motives, yet connected by a web of deception, ambition, and misplaced loyalty. Patricia had struck the first blow, seeking to secure her position and financial future through Charles's inheritance. Lucy Bellinger had delivered the fatal wound, believing she was protecting Charles from his uncle's interference, while nurturing impossible romantic hopes. And Eliza Haydock, though not directly involved in the murder, had helped create the circumstances that made it inevitable through her participation in the art fraud. Human nature, Miss Marple reflected, remained consistent in its capacity for self-deception. Each participant had justified their actions as necessary or deserved, viewing themselves not as criminals, but as individuals righting perceived wrongs or securing futures unfairly threatened. As darkness fell over St. Mary Mead, the village settled into an uneasy calm. The truth had emerged. Justice would be served, but the ripples of that fatal harvest ball would continue to spread through the community for years to come. A week after Lucy Bellinger's confession, St. Mary Mead had settled into a strange calm. The media attention had largely subsided, leaving the village to process the shocking revelations about 3 of its residents. Patricia Bennett and Lucy Bellinger remained in custody awaiting trial, while Eliza Haydock had been released on bail, returning to London under strict conditions. Miss Marple, seated in her garden with her almost completed blue baby blanket, found her thoughts returning repeatedly to certain aspects of the case. Despite the seemingly neat resolution, 3 confessions, clear motives, a plausible sequence of events, some element continued to trouble her, like an incorrect stitch in an otherwise perfect pattern. The telephone's ring interrupted her contemplation. It was Inspector Craddock, his tone suggesting professional rather than social purpose. Miss Marple, I wonder if you might be available this afternoon. There's a matter related to the Hargreaves case. I'd like to discuss. Of course, Inspector, would you prefer to come to the cottage, or shall I meet you elsewhere? Actually, I'm at the old hall with Charles Hargreaves. He's preparing for Sir William's funeral tomorrow, and has raised some concerns that might benefit from your perspective. I see. I could be there in an hour, if that would be convenient. Perfect. I'll send a car for you. The police constable who arrived to transport Miss Marple was respectfully attentive, helping her into the vehicle with careful courtesy. As they drove through the village, she noted the autumn colors had deepened further, the landscape preparing for winter's approach. Nature's cycles continued. Regardless of human dramas, the old hall presented a somber aspect, black crape adorning the entrance in preparation for the funeral. Charles Hargreaves greeted Miss Marple in the main hall, his handsome face drawn with strain. Thank you for coming, Miss Marple. Inspector Craddock thought you might help clarify certain matters. I'll certainly try, Mr. Hargreaves. Charles led them to Sir William's study, now restored to order after the police investigation, though the ghost of violence seemed to linger in the air. Inspector Craddock was examining the desk, but straightened as they entered. Ah, Miss Marple, thank you for joining us. Mr. Hargreaves has been going through his uncle's papers in preparation for the estate settlement and has discovered something unexpected. Charles gestured to several documents spread across the desk. These are my uncle's financial records for the past 3 years. I've been reviewing them with the family solicitor to understand the full extent of the estate's holdings. A necessary task, though surely not one requiring my input, Miss Marple observed mildly. It's what I found within these records that's concerning. Charles indicated a leather-bound ledger. This contains entries for significant cash withdrawals, approximately £40,000 over the past 18 months. Each withdrawal is annotated simply with the word security. A substantial sum, Miss Marple agreed. Though perhaps your uncle had investments not formally documented. That's what I initially assumed, Charles replied, but when I mentioned these withdrawals to Inspector Craddock, he shared some rather disturbing information from Patricia's further questioning. Craddock took up the explanation. Miss Bennet claims she was unaware of these specific transactions. However, she did mention that Sir William had spoken of paying for peace on several occasions, comments she attributed to his general dislike of change or disruption. Most interesting, Miss Marple murmured. And you believe these payments might relate to something beyond normal estate management? I'm concerned they might represent blackmail payments, Charles said bluntly. Which raises the question of who was blackmailing my uncle, and over what? A question that might have significant bearing on his murder, Craddock added. If Sir William was being blackmailed, it introduces another potential motive, and possibly another suspect. Miss Marple considered the ledger thoughtfully. The annotation security is rather ambiguous. It could indeed refer to blackmail payments, but might equally represent investments in actual security measures, or even a private account Sir William maintained for personal purposes. That's why I wanted your insight, Miss Marple, Craddock explained. You knew Sir William and the dynamics of the village. Might you have observed anything that could suggest who might have had leverage over him? Miss Marple's needles paused as she contemplated the question. Sir William was a proud man, Inspector, traditional in his values and protective of the family reputation. If someone had discovered information that threatened that reputation, that's precisely my concern, Charles interjected. My uncle was intensely private about family matters. The idea that someone might have been exploiting that privacy is disturbing.
May I ask, Mr. Hargreaves, whether your uncle ever mentioned any concerns about family secrets potentially becoming public, perhaps in relation to your father or other relatives?
A shadow crossed Charles's face. Not explicitly, no, though he was always particular about certain aspects of family history, especially regarding my father's time in colonial service. He maintained a collection of my father's journals and correspondence in a locked cabinet in his bedroom. I haven't examined them yet. Perhaps that might be advisable, Miss Marple suggested gently. Family histories often contain unexpected revelations. As Charles excused himself to locate the key to this cabinet, Inspector Craddock moved closer to Miss Marple, lowering his voice. You have a theory, he observed. Something beyond what we've discussed. Not a theory precisely, Inspector, merely an awareness that human motives are rarely simple. and family histories often contain complications that later generations prefer to obscure. You think Sir William was being blackmailed about something in his brother's past? It seems a possibility worth exploring, especially given the timing of these payments, beginning 18 months ago. Was there any significant event that occurred around that time? A new arrival to the village, perhaps? Craddock's expression sharpened. Mrs. Farrington arrived in St. Mary Mead approximately 18 months ago, indeed, and quickly established a particular interest in Sir William. You think she was blackmailing him? But then why pursue a romantic relationship? Perhaps the relationship was the ultimate goal, Miss Marple suggested. With financial extraction merely the opening gambit. Before Craddock could respond, Charles returned carrying a small wooden box, his expression troubled. I found this hidden among my father's journals, he said, placing the box on the desk. It contains letters from India, dated during my father's posting there in the colonial administration. They're from a woman named Annabel Farrington. Farrington? Craddock repeated sharply. Any relation to Mrs. Elaine Farrington, who recently moved to the village? I don't know, but these letters suggest a significant relationship between this woman and my father, despite his marriage to my mother. Charles hesitated. There are references to a child, a daughter, born in the same year as your birth, Miss Marple noted quietly. Yes. Charles's voice was strained. Which suggests the possibility of a half-sister, Craddock concluded, born to your father's mistress in India. And if Mrs. Farrington is related to this Annabel, perhaps her sister or cousin. Charles didn't complete the thought, the implications hanging heavily in the air. It would explain Sir William's resistance to her romantic overtures. Miss Marple observed. If he knew of this connection and feared she might use it to claim some portion of the Hargreaves' legacy for her relative's child. Or herself, Craddock added. Blackmail often begins with legitimate grievances before evolving into simple extortion. Charles sank into a chair, the weight of these revelations evident in his posture. So my uncle was paying to keep this family secret buried. And when Mrs. Farrington pushed for more marriage, perhaps he resisted, planning to break off their relationship entirely. Until the discovery of the art fraud forced him to reconsider, Miss Marple suggested. Finding himself already compromised by one scandal, he may have decided to resolve the other through formal acknowledgement. The note he sent to Mrs. Farrington the morning of the ball, Craddock nodded, suggesting a private meeting to resolve certain matters. My God, Charles murmured. So many deceptions, so many hidden agendas, and my uncle caught in the middle of it all. Family histories are rarely as straightforward as they appear in portrait galleries. Mr. Hargreaves, Miss Marple said gently. Every generation has its secrets and compromises. A hushed silence fell over the study as each contemplated the implications of these discoveries. Finally, Inspector Craddock straightened, professional purpose reasserting itself. I believe we need to speak with Mrs. Farrington again, he stated. These new revelations may significantly alter our understanding of the case. May I suggest, Inspector, Miss Marple interjected, that a less formal approach might yield more candid information. Perhaps an invitation for tea, rather than an official interview. What are you proposing, Miss Marple? Simply that Mrs. Farrington might respond more openly in a social setting, particularly if the invitation comes from Charles rather than the police. After all, if her connection to the family is as we suspect, she has a vested interest in establishing a relationship with him. Charles looked startled. You want me to invite her here? After learning she may have been blackmailing my uncle? Not here, perhaps, Miss Marple amended. My cottage might provide a more neutral setting, and I would be present throughout, as would Inspector Craddock, though perhaps not immediately identified as such. Craddock considered the suggestion. A strategic conversation rather than a formal interview. It has merit, especially if Mrs. Farrington doesn't realize we've discovered these letters. I'm not sure I can maintain such a pretense, Charles admitted. Knowing what she may have done to my uncle, consider it an opportunity to learn the full truth. Mr. Hargreaves, Miss Marple encouraged. About your father, potentially about a half-sister you never knew existed, and yes, about your uncle's death. Sometimes the path to understanding requires uncomfortable temporary measures. After further discussion, a plan was formulated. Charles would telephone Mrs. Farrington that evening, inviting her to tea at Miss Marple's cottage the following afternoon. the day after Sir William's funeral. The pretext would be discussing certain family matters that had come to light during preparations for the estate settlement. Inspector Craddock would be present, but introduced simply as Mr. Craddock, a family advisor. The conversation would be allowed to develop naturally, with Miss Marple guiding it toward the critical topics as appropriate. A psychological test, in essence, Craddock summarized, to observe Mrs. Farrington's reactions when confronted indirectly with what we suspect. Human nature often reveals itself most clearly when under gentle but unexpected pressure, Miss Marple agreed. Like a loose thread that, when pulled carefully, eventually unravels the entire fabric. The following day, Sir William Hargreaves was laid to rest in the churchyard of St. Mary Mead, his funeral attended by most of the village, despite the scandal surrounding his death. Charles, as chief mourner, maintained dignified composure throughout, though Miss Marple, watching from her modest position near the back of the church, noted the strain evident in his bearing. Mrs. Farrington attended the service, dressed in appropriate black, her expression a careful mask of respectful grief. She did not approach Charles directly, but nodded acknowledgement when their gazes briefly met across the churchyard. That evening, Charles made the arranged telephone call. Mrs. Farrington accepted his invitation with what he later described to Miss Marple as eager composure, a combination of apparent restraint, overlying obvious interest. The stage was set for what Miss Marple privately considered her final contribution to the case, a carefully orchestrated conversation designed to reveal truths that formal questioning might never uncover. The following afternoon, Miss Marple's cottage was prepared with meticulous attention to detail. Cherry had been instructed to prepare a particularly fine tea with sandwiches and scones. The best china was arranged on a lace tablecloth, and fresh flowers from the garden provided a touch of color despite the advancing season. Inspector Craddock arrived early, dressed in civilian clothes that suggested professional competence, without police authority. They reviewed their approach one final time, before Charles Hargreaves joined them, bringing with him the box of letters discovered among his father's possessions. Remember, Miss Marple advised, our purpose is understanding, not accusation. Let the conversation develop naturally, with opportunities for Mrs. Farrington to choose candor rather than continued deception. Mrs. Farrington arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, elegant in a dark blue ensemble that acknowledged recent bereavement while avoiding excessive somberness. Her composed smile revealed nothing of any inner trepidation she might feel at this unexpected invitation. "How kind of you to include me, Miss Marple," she said as introductions were made. "And Mr. Hargreaves, my condolences again on your loss. Sir William was a truly remarkable man." "Indeed he was," Charles replied, his tone neutral. "Though I'm discovering that there were aspects of his life and my family's history that remain something of a mystery to me." Mrs. Farrington accepted a cup of tea, her movements graceful and controlled. "Family histories often contain surprises, I find, especially in families of significant standing, such as the Hargreaves," Miss Marple observed mildly. "A family with colonial connections spanning generations." "Yes, I believe Sir William mentioned his brother's service in India," Mrs. Farrington agreed. Mrs. Farrington agreed. "Administrative position, wasn't it? My father was Deputy Commissioner in Bengal for 12 years, Charles confirmed. "A significant portion of my childhood was spent there, though I was sent to England for schooling at age 7, as was customary for families of our position." A fleeting expression, something like nostalgia or perhaps regret, crossed Mrs. Farrington's face. India creates powerful impressions, even on young children. The colors, the scents, the extraordinary contrast between colonial order and ancient traditions. "You speak as though from experience, Mrs. Farrington," Inspector Craddock observed casually. She sipped her tea before responding. "I spent some time in Delhi as a young woman. My sister was married to an official in the British mission there. I visited for several extended periods during the early..." "How interesting," Miss Marple commented. "That would have overlapped with Mr. Hargreaves's father's posting, would it not?" A moment of tension, almost imperceptible in its brevity. "I believe it might have. Yes, though Bengal and Delhi were quite separate worlds within the colonial structure, and yet official circles were often surprisingly interconnected," Charles suggested. "My father's journals mention numerous interactions with Delhi-based administrators. I wouldn't know about official matters," Mrs. Farrington replied smoothly. My visits were purely social, centered around my sister's household. Charles set down his teacup with deliberate care. Your sister, would that be Annabel? The question hung in the air like the moment before a thunderclap. Mrs. Farrington's composure faltered visibly, her teacup pausing halfway to its saucer. How do you know that name? She asked, her voice suddenly stripped of its practiced elegance. From these. Charles placed the wooden box on the table between them. Letters my father kept hidden among his private papers. Letters from Annabel Farrington to Richard Hargreaves, spanning the years 19. Mrs. Farrington's gaze fixed on the box, her complexion paling beneath her careful makeup. Those are private correspondence. Indeed they are, Charles agreed. Yet they speak to matters that appear to have direct bearing on recent events in St. Mary Mead, including, potentially, my uncle's death. A tense silence descended, broken only by the ticking of Miss Marple's mantel clock and the distant calls of birds in the garden. Finally, Mrs. Farrington set down her cup with a decisive click. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Hargreaves? I'm not suggesting anything, Mrs. Farrington. I'm simply seeking clarity about certain matters, including the nature of your relationship with my uncle, the substantial cash withdrawals noted in his financial records over the past 18 months, and the existence of a child mentioned in these letters, a daughter born to Annabel Farrington. The composed facade crumbled completely, revealing a complex mixture of defiance, calculation, and something that might have been relief. You have no right to judge situations you couldn't possibly understand, Mrs. Farrington said quietly. Colonial life created its own rules, its own moral frameworks. I'm not here to judge, Mrs. Farrington, Charles replied, only to understand. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her manner gentle yet direct. Perhaps you might start by telling us about your sister, Mrs. Farrington, and her relationship with Richard Hargreaves. The widow's gaze shifted between the three faces watching her, ultimately settling on Charles with a peculiar intensity. Annabel was my younger sister by 8 years. Beautiful, idealistic, hopelessly romantic. She went to India as a teacher with dreams of making a difference. Instead, she met your father at a diplomatic reception, and they began a relationship, Charles supplied. An affair, Mr. Hargreaves? Let's not dress it in euphemisms. Your father was married to your mother, living in Bengal with his family, including you, his son and heir, yet he maintained a separate household in Delhi where my sister lived as his mistress, believing his promises that he would eventually leave his wife. And the child mentioned in these letters? Mrs. Farrington's expression hardened. Your half-sister, born in January 1974, 7 months after your father was recalled to England for what was described as family reasons. He left Annabel with vague promises of support and communication, neither of which materialized in any meaningful way. These letters suggest otherwise, Charles countered, indicating the box. They continued for years after his departure, letters filled with excuses and diminishing promises, Mrs. Farrington said bitterly. While Annabel struggled to raise a child alone in a society that condemned her choices, your father's occasional financial contributions barely covered necessities, let alone provided the security he had promised. And what became of them? Annabel and my half-sister? A shadow crossed Mrs. Farrington's face. Annabel died of typhoid in 1982. Elizabeth, her daughter, was raised primarily by me after that. I had married by then, reasonably well, though not luxuriously. We provided what stability we could. And when you came to St. Mary Mead 18 months ago? Inspector Craddock inquired, maintaining his cover as a family advisor. Was that a coincidence, Mrs. Farrington? Or was there purpose behind your choice of location? Mrs. Farrington's laugh held no humor. There are rarely true coincidences in life, Mr. Craddock. I came to Mary Mead because Richard Hargreaves was dead. His widow had remarried and moved abroad, and Sir William remained as the guardian of the family fortune, a fortune that, by moral right if not legal entitlement, should have acknowledged Richard's daughter. So you approached Sir William, Miss Marple stated quietly. Not initially as a romantic interest, but as a claimant on behalf of your niece. I approached him with evidence of his brother's relationship with my sister. Yes, and with documented proof of Elizabeth's paternity medical records. Richard himself had signed before leaving India, and demanded money, Charles said flatly. I demanded acknowledgement, Mrs. Farrington corrected, her voice rising slightly. Financial support that should have been provided decades ago. Sir William was initially dismissive, then angry. Claimed I was attempting to extort his family with unsubstantiated claims. But eventually he began making payments, Inspector Craddock noted. Regular cash withdrawals annotated as security in his ledgers. Yes, once he examined the evidence properly, he recognized the truth. The payments were meant to be temporary until he determined a more permanent resolution. A trust fund for Elizabeth, perhaps, without public acknowledgement of her parentage. Mrs. Farrington's expression softened slightly. Your uncle was not an unreasonable man, Mr. Hargreaves. Traditional, yes. Protective of family reputation, certainly, but not without conscience. And the romantic relationship that developed between you? Miss Marple inquired gently. Was that merely a strategy to secure further commitment? Mrs. Farrington's gaze met hers directly. It began as such, I confess. A calculated approach to ensure continued attention to Elizabeth's situation. But over time, she hesitated. William was a complex man. Formal in manner yet capable of unexpected kindness. We developed a genuine regard for each other, despite the circumstances of our initial connection. Yet days before his death, he sent you a letter postponing your arrangement, Charles reminded her. Followed by another note, the morning of the ball, suggesting a private meeting. The second note surprised me, given his previous message, but I hoped it represented reconsideration. Mrs. Farrington's composure faltered again. I never had the chance to find out. I waited by the garden terrace at the appointed time, but William never appeared. And then he was found dead, Inspector Craddock completed the thought. Murdered in his study. Mrs. Farrington looked away, blinking rapidly. I read about the art fraud in the papers. And this woman, Patricia Bennet, her confession. It seems almost absurd that William died because of some elaborate deception involving paintings, when there were such significant family matters at stake. Charles leaned forward, his expression intent. Mrs. Farrington, I must ask directly, did you have any involvement in my uncle's death? Any knowledge of what Patricia Bennet or Lucy Bellinger intended? None whatsoever, she replied without hesitation. Whatever you may think of my methods in approaching your uncle, I had no reason to wish him dead. Quite the contrary, his death threatened the resolution we were working toward for Elizabeth's future. And where is Elizabeth now? Miss Marple asked softly. In Canada. She's a professor of anthropology at McGill University in Montreal. Married, with 2 children of her own. A flash of genuine pride crossed Mrs. Farrington's face. She's built a good life, despite the circumstances of her birth and the absence of her father's family. Does she know about her connection to the Hargreaves family? Charles inquired. She knows her father was a British colonial administrator who never acknowledged her. I've spared her most of the details, the broken promises, the years of struggle Annabel endured. There seemed little purpose in nurturing resentment, and she doesn't know about your arrangement with Sir William. No. I intended to tell her only if a formal resolution was established. A trust fund, or legal acknowledgement that might benefit her children's education, perhaps. Mrs. Farrington's gaze returned to Charles, direct and challenging. She has no interest in claiming the Hargreaves name or position, Mr. Hargreaves. Only the support that should have been her birthright. As the conversation continued, Miss Marple observed Mrs. Farrington carefully, noting the subtle shifts in her demeanor as family history gave way to recent events. There was calculation in her approach, certainly, a strategic exploitation of familial guilt and responsibility, yet there also appeared to be genuine emotion regarding her sister's fate and her niece's welfare. Most significantly, Miss Marple detected no evasion or artifice when Mrs. Farrington discussed Sir William's death. Her distress seemed authentic, her frustration at the interruption of their developing arrangement convincing. When Inspector Craddock finally revealed his official capacity, Mrs. Farrington showed surprise but not alarm. She agreed to provide a formal statement regarding her relationship with Sir William and the financial arrangements between them, while maintaining her complete ignorance of the murder plot. As Mrs. Farrington departed, Charles Hargreaves remained in Miss Marple's sitting room, visibly processing the revelations about his family history. "Do you believe her, Miss Marple?" he asked finally. "About having no involvement in my uncle's death?" I do, she replied simply. Mrs. Farrington's methods in approaching your uncle may have been questionable, but her motives were consistent and rational. Sir William's death disrupted a developing resolution that would have achieved her goals. Murder would have been counterproductive, and her claims about my father, about this half-sister I never knew existed. The evidence seems compelling, Miss Marple said gently, though only you can decide what significance to give this new branch of your family tree. Charles nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than distressed. I'd like to meet her, Elizabeth. Whatever the circumstances of her birth, she's my father's daughter. That means something, doesn't it? Family connections often do, Mr. Hargreaves, even unexpected ones. After Charles and Inspector Craddock departed, Miss Marple returned to her garden, completing her daily routine of tending the late autumn blooms that persisted despite the season's turn toward winter. The Hargreaves case had revealed, as so many cases did, the complex interweaving of past and present, how decisions made decades earlier continued to shape current events in ways both subtle and profound. 3 women had contributed to Sir William's death, each acting from different motives, yet connected by the common thread of self-interest, and behind it all lay the shadows of colonial privilege, family secrets, and the complicated legacy of a man who had abandoned one family while maintaining another. Human nature, Miss Marple reflected, remained remarkably consistent in its capacity for both compassion and calculation, sacrifice and selfishness. The truly surprising element was not that people acted from complex, often contradictory motives, but that they so frequently believed their actions justified by circumstances or deserved through suffering. As darkness fell over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple completed the final stitches of her blue baby blanket for her grandniece's child, a new generation beginning, untouched by the complications of the past, yet inevitably shaped by its legacy, just as the Hargreaves family would continue, perhaps now with an acknowledgement of its extended branches. The patterns repeated, generation after generation. And Miss Marple, having seen so many of these patterns emerge and resolve throughout her long life, found a certain comfort in their predictability, even when, as in this case, they led to tragedy before resolution. 1 week after the revelations concerning Mrs. Farrington's connection to the Hargreaves family, Inspector Craddock requested Miss Marple's presence at the police station in Much Benham. The small market town, larger and more prosperous than Mary Mead, housed the regional police headquarters, from which Craddock oversaw criminal investigations throughout the district. Miss Marple arrived promptly at 11 o'clock, her neat appearance and mild manner causing several junior officers to underestimate her significance, as she was escorted to Craddock's office. "Thank you for coming, Miss Marple," the inspector greeted her, rising from behind his desk. "I thought you might appreciate an update on the case before the formal proceedings begin. The Crown Prosecution Service has made their final decisions regarding charges." "Most thoughtful of you, Inspector," she replied, settling into the offered chair. "Patricia Bennett will be charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud," Craddock explained. "Lucy Bellinger faces murder charges, as the medical evidence confirms Sir William died from the stab wound she inflicted, not from Patricia's earlier assault. Eliza Haydock will be prosecuted for fraud and conspiracy, though not as an accessory to murder. And Mrs. Farrington, no charges related to Sir William's death. Her financial arrangement with him, while ethically questionable, doesn't constitute criminal blackmail as we initially suspected." Sir William acknowledged the legitimacy of her claims and entered into the payments voluntarily. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. A reasonable resolution, given the evidence. "There is, however, one remaining issue," Craddock continued, his expression growing more serious. "Both Patricia Bennett and Lucy Bellinger are now claiming diminished responsibility. Patricia citing emotional distress following her father's financial disgrace. Lucy claiming decades of unhealthy obsession with Charles clouded her judgment. A common defense when facing serious charges," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Yes, though in this case, both have requested to speak with you before their formal arraignment tomorrow." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "They seem to believe you might understand their actions in a way the legal system cannot." "Understanding human behavior doesn't equate to excusing it, Inspector. Precisely my thought. Nevertheless, their solicitors have made formal requests. I'm inclined to grant them, with your permission and under proper supervision, of course." Miss Marple considered briefly. I have no objection to speaking with them, though I doubt I can offer the absolution they appear to seek. The interviews were arranged in a small conference room, with Craddock present and a recording device discreetly operating. Patricia Bennett was brought in first, her customary elegance diminished by prison attire and the absence of cosmetics, though she maintained a certain composure. Miss Marple, she greeted with forced cordiality. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Good morning, Miss Bennett. I understand you wish to speak with me. Patricia glanced at Craddock before focusing on Miss Marple. I wanted to explain, to help you understand why events unfolded as they did. The newspapers have portrayed me as coldly calculating, but that's not the complete truth. Few truths are ever complete in newspaper accounts, Miss Marple acknowledged. What aspect do you feel has been misrepresented? My relationship with Charles was genuine, Patricia insisted. Not merely a strategic connection to secure financial stability, as they've suggested. I truly cared for him, still do. And Sir William's interference was destroying our chance at happiness. By threatening to change his will if Charles continued your relationship, Miss Marple prompted. Yes, but it wasn't just about money, it was about control. Sir William's absolute determination to control every aspect of Charles's life. Just as he controlled the village, the estate, everything within his reach. Patricia leaned forward, her expression earnest. The art fraud began as Eliza's scheme. Yes, I facilitated it initially for financial reasons, after my father's disgrace left me nearly destitute. But as time passed, it became a form of rebellion against Sir William's suffocating authority. Rebellion that escalated to violence, Craddock noted dryly. Patricia's gaze remained fixed on Miss Marple. I never intended to kill him, you must believe that. I struck him in anger. Yes, after he told me he was changing his will, disinheriting Charles, unless he ended our relationship. But I truly believed he was already dead when I left that study. If I'd known he was still alive, would you have sought medical help for him? Miss Marple asked gently, or would you have completed what you'd begun? The question hung in the air unanswered directly as Patricia's composure faltered. I've made terrible choices, she admitted finally. Driven by desperation and a desire for the security and position my family once held. But I'm not a murderer, Miss Marple. Not in my heart. Our actions define us more conclusively than our hearts, I find, Miss Marple replied. Though understanding the path that led to those actions may offer some context. After Patricia was escorted out, Lucy Bellinger was brought in, a thin, nervous woman in her 50s, whose unremarkable appearance belied the decisive role she had played in Sir William's death. Miss Marple, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I've heard you understand things that others miss, that you see beneath the surface of village life. I simply observe human nature, Miss Bellinger. The habit developed over many years. Then perhaps you've observed how invisible certain people become, how they fade into the background of grand houses and important lives, present but unseen. Lucy's voice held a bitter edge. I served the Hargreaves family faithfully for 32 years. I watched Charles grow from a child into a man. I tended his needs, anticipated his wishes, remained loyal when others sought only advantage. A commendable dedication, Miss Marple acknowledged. More than dedication. Lucy's hands twisted nervously in her lap. I loved him, not as a servant loves a master, but as a woman loves a man. For years I believed that eventually he would see me, truly see me, and recognize what I could offer him. Constancy, understanding, devotion without condition. Instead, he formed an attachment to Patricia Bennett, Craddock supplied. Lucy's expression hardened. A woman who saw him only as a means to restore her social position, who participated in a scheme to defraud his family, while pretending affection. I knew what she was. I observed her movements, noted her whispered conversations with that London art woman, recognized the pattern of deception. Yet you didn't alert Sir William to your suspicions, Miss Marple noted. I believed exposure would come naturally, revealing her true character to Charles. Instead, Sir William discovered the fraud first, and threatened to disinherit Charles if he continued their relationship. Lucy leaned forward, her voice dropping. Don't you see? He was punishing Charles for her crimes. It was unjust, cruel. So, when you found Sir William unconscious in his study, I acted to protect Charles's future, his inheritance, his freedom to make his own choices without his uncle's interference. Lucy's expression turned pleading. I didn't plan it. The letter opener was there on his desk. A moment's decision, a single action that would solve everything. For Charles, a significant decision to make on someone else's behalf, Miss Marple observed mildly. Love makes us capable of actions we would never otherwise contemplate, Lucy replied, her gaze distant. I've spent my life in the shadows, Miss Marple. When I saw an opportunity to secure Charles's happiness, to be the unknown guardian of his future, I took it without hesitation, even knowing it was murder. Even then, Lucy's eyes refocused, meeting Miss Marple's directly. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding from the law, but I thought perhaps you, who have observed human hearts for so long, might recognize the desperation that drives such actions. After both interviews concluded, Miss Marple sat with Inspector Craddock in his office, a cup of tea warming her hands as they discussed the case. Remarkably different perspectives on the same events, Craddock observed. Each woman justifying her actions through her particular lens of motivation. Human nature tends toward self-justification, Miss Marple replied. We rarely acknowledge ourselves as villains in our own narratives, regardless of our actions. And your impression? Do you believe either woman's account affects the fundamental facts of the case? Miss Marple considered carefully before responding. The emotions they describe are undoubtedly genuine. Patricia's resentment of Sir William's control, Lucy's misguided devotion to Charles, but these feelings merely explain their actions. They don't excuse them. My thoughts exactly. Craddock leaned back in his chair. The case will proceed to trial next month. The evidence is substantial, including both confessions. I expect convictions on all counts. And Eliza Haydock, has she provided further information about the art fraud? Extensive details. Yes. It seems she was the architect of the scheme, identifying valuable pieces in Sir William's collection that could be replaced without immediate detection. Patricia provided access and facilitated the substitutions, while Eliza created the reproductions and arranged sales of the originals through her gallery connections. A partnership of complementary skills, Miss Marple noted. Though I imagine their relationship was always one of convenience rather than loyalty. Evidently so. Eliza has been remarkably forthcoming, perhaps hoping for leniency through cooperation. She claims to have had no knowledge of Patricia's intention to harm Sir William, though she admitted suspecting something was amiss when Patricia proposed the impersonation scheme for the ball. As Miss Marple prepared to leave, Craddock accompanied her to the door, his expression thoughtful. You know, Miss Marple, this case might never have been resolved correctly without your observations. The multiple layers of deception, the different participants with their separate motives, it created a remarkably complex puzzle. Not so very complex when viewed through the lens of human nature, Inspector. The patterns remain consistent, even when the specific circumstances vary, such as ambition frustrated by circumstance, pride wounded by rejection, devotion twisted by obsession, and beneath it all, the desperate desire to determine one's own fate, rather than accepting limitations imposed by others. Miss Marple smiled gently. These motivations appear in drawing rooms as frequently as in grand halls, merely dressed in different clothing. That evening, Miss Marple received an unexpected visitor. Charles Hargreaves appeared at her garden gate as twilight descended, his expression suggesting purposeful contemplation rather than distress. Miss Marple, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to thank you personally for your assistance in unraveling the circumstances of my uncle's death. Not at all, Mr. Hargreaves. Please join me for a moment. They settled on the garden bench, the autumn air crisp around them as darkness gathered. Inspector Craddock told me you spoke with both Patricia and Lucy today. Charles began. I can scarcely reconcile the women I knew with the actions they've admitted. People often present different aspects of themselves in different contexts, Miss Marple observed. We see what they choose to reveal, particularly when affection colors our perception. A diplomatic way of saying, I was blind to what was happening around me, Charles said with a rueful smile. Youth is often more focused on possibilities than on careful observation. It's not necessarily a failing. Charles was silent for a moment, contemplating the darkening garden. I've made a decision, Miss Marple. 2. Actually, I wanted you to be among the first to know. Indeed, I contacted Elizabeth Farrington, or Elizabeth Hargreaves, as she perhaps should be known, my half-sister in Canada. We've exchanged emails and plan to meet when her academic schedule permits travel to England. A significant step, Miss Marple acknowledged, and a generous one, given the circumstances. It seems the right thing to do. Whatever my father's failings, they shouldn't determine my relationship with his other child. Charles hesitated briefly. I've also decided to establish the trust fund my uncle was considering before his death, for Elizabeth and her children, a formal acknowledgement of their connection to the Hargreaves family. That would be most appropriate, I think. And I've offered Mrs. Farrington a small cottage on the estate, not as compensation or obligation, but in recognition of her sister's connection to our family. She's considering the offer. Miss Marple nodded approvingly. New chapters often begin with acknowledgement of the past. Mr. Hargreaves, your decisions suggest wisdom beyond your years. As Charles prepared to leave, he paused, a question clearly forming. Miss Marple, may I ask something rather personal? How do you maintain such clarity of perception in cases like these? Such balance in your understanding of human motivation? Miss Marple considered her response carefully. I suppose it comes from a lifetime of observation, Mr. Hargreaves. Recognizing that people are rarely entirely good or entirely wicked, merely human, with all the complexity that entails, and perhaps from understanding that we are all capable of both nobility and selfishness, depending on circumstances and the choices we make when facing them. Charles nodded thoughtfully. I'll remember that. Good night, Miss Marple, and thank you again for everything. As she watched him walk away, Miss Marple reflected that perhaps some good might yet emerge from the tragedy of Sir William's death. Not justification for the actions that caused it, but a possible path toward healing and connection that might otherwise have remained unexplored. The pieces of the complex puzzle had finally found their proper places. The art fraud that threatened exposure, Patricia's assault, driven by ambition and resentment, Lucy's fatal intervention motivated by misguided devotion, and underlying it all, the family secret that Sir William had tried to manage through increasingly unsustainable compromises. Each thread in the pattern had eventually connected with others, creating the complete design that had eluded initial perception. And as so often happened in Miss Marple's experience, the resolution brought not only justice, but also unexpected clarity, illuminating shadowed corners of human relationships that might otherwise have remained forever dark. Winter arrived in St. Mary Mead, with a gentle persistence, frost edging Miss Marple's garden each morning, the last leaves falling from the ancient oaks on the village green. 3 months had passed since Sir William Hargreaves' death at the harvest ball, and the village had gradually absorbed the shock of multiple revelations into its collective memory, where the events would undoubtedly be referenced for generations to come. The trials had proceeded with the efficiency of a legal system confronted with substantial evidence and multiple confessions. Patricia Bennett received 8 years for attempted murder and fraud, her composed facade finally cracking as the sentence was pronounced. Lucy Bellinger, convicted of murder, faced a longer term, though her age and previous unblemished record had been considered in mitigation. Eliza Haydock's cooperation secured a reduced sentence of 4 years for her role in the art fraud, with the possibility of earlier release. Miss Marple followed the proceedings through newspaper accounts and occasional updates from Inspector Craddock. Her attention focused primarily on her winter gardening preparations and correspondence with distant relatives. The blue baby blanket had been dispatched to her grandniece with appropriate congratulations, and she had begun work on a delicate christening gown, her needles clicking rhythmically during the long winter evenings. On a crisp December morning, Miss Marple was surprised by a visit from Mrs. Bantry, arriving with unnecessary haste and obvious excitement. Jane, have you heard? Charles Hargreaves is hosting a Christmas gathering at the Old Hall, the first since Sir William's death, and he's invited the entire village. How thoughtful of him, Miss Marple replied mildly, directing Cherry to prepare fresh tea for their unexpected guest. More than thoughtful, it's a complete departure from tradition. Sir William's Christmas events were always so formal, restricted to certain families and official dignitaries. Charles has invited everyone, the shopkeepers, the gardeners, even the cleaning staff from the village hall. Mrs. Bantry settled into her chair with obvious delight at being the bearer of such notable news. And that's not all. Mrs. Farrington has moved into Wisteria Cottage on the estate grounds. It's been renovated completely, new roof, modern kitchen, everything. I had heard that Charles offered her accommodation, Miss Marple acknowledged. A generous gesture, given the circumstances. Generous indeed. Though village opinion is divided, as you might expect. Some think it most appropriate, given the Hargreaves family's historical obligation. Others consider it rather scandalous, acknowledging such a connection openly. Human nature tends to resist change, Miss Marple observed, particularly when it challenges established perceptions. Well, Charles certainly isn't resisting it. He's implemented all sorts of changes at the estate, opened the gardens to the public on weekends, established an educational trust for local children, even commissioned a complete inventory and authentication of the art collection, with proceeds from certain sales dedicated to community projects, all suggesting a young man finding his own path, Miss Marple noted approvingly. One imagines Sir William might have resisted such innovations. Undoubtedly, though between ourselves, Jane, the village is rather flourishing under this new approach. Even Reverend Clement admits the church restoration is progressing far more rapidly with Charles's support than it would have under Sir William's more measured contributions. As Mrs. Bantry continued detailing the various changes instituted at the old hall, Miss Marple reflected on the curious workings of circumstance. Sir William's death, precipitated by deception and resentment, had inadvertently cleared the path for a more progressive stewardship of the Hargreaves legacy, one that perhaps better served the contemporary needs of St. Mary Mead, while maintaining respect for tradition. Not justification for murder, certainly, yet a reminder that human history progressed through complex intersections of intention and accident, planned action and unforeseen consequence. Later that week, Miss Marple received a formal invitation to the Christmas gathering at the old hall. The elegant card personally signed by Charles Hargreaves, she accepted with a brief note of thanks, pleased by the thoughtful inclusion, though uncertain whether her health would permit attendance as the winter deepened. The day of the gathering arrived with a light snowfall that transformed St. Mary Mead into a scene worthy of a Christmas card. White dusted cottages, holly berries bright against evergreen foliage, children's snowmen standing guard in front gardens. Miss Marple fortified against the cold in her warmest coat and a new woolen scarf. A gift from Dr. Haydock, who remained attentive to her health, allowed Mr. Fairweather to escort her to the old hall in his well-maintained car. The ancient house presented a welcoming aspect, windows glowing with warm light, pine garlands adorning the entrance, the scent of mulled wine greeting visitors as they arrived. Charles Hargreaves stood in the great hall, personally welcoming each guest with genuine warmth rather than formal obligation. "Miss Marple, I'm delighted you could come," he exclaimed, taking her gloved hands in his own. "Please, make yourself comfortable. There's a particularly good seat by the fire in the drawing room that I think you'll find pleasant." The gathering differed markedly from Sir William's formal events, with their rigid social hierarchies and prescribed interactions. Instead, villagers of all backgrounds mingled freely, enjoying abundant refreshments and admiring the traditional decorations that honored the house's heritage, while creating a genuinely festive atmosphere. Miss Marple, settled comfortably in the drawing room as Charles had suggested, observed the proceedings with quiet appreciation. Mrs. Farrington was present, elegant yet subdued, engaged in conversation with Dr. Haydock near one of the Christmas trees. The doctor had apparently adjusted his initial reserve toward her, perhaps influenced by Charles's evident acceptance of the family connection she represented. "Quite a transformation, wouldn't you say?" Reverend Clement commented, taking the seat beside Miss Marple. "Charles has found his own way of honoring tradition, while embracing necessary change. A difficult balance to achieve," Miss Marple agreed. "Though, perhaps easier, when one feels secure in one's position rather than constantly defending it." Indeed, Sir William, for all his admirable qualities, viewed innovation as threat rather than opportunity. Charles seems to recognize that tradition remains strongest when it adapts to contemporary needs. As the evening progressed, Miss Marple found herself approached by various villagers, each eager to share their observations about the changes at the old hall and in St. Mary Mead generally. The conversation inevitably touched on the tragic events of the Harvest Ball, though with decreasing frequency as the festivities continued, the past gradually relinquishing its hold on the present moment. Near the end of the evening, Charles Hargreaves joined Miss Marple briefly, a glass of mulled wine in hand, and evident satisfaction in his expression. "I wanted to thank you again, Miss Marple, not just for your role in resolving the circumstances of my uncle's death, but for your wisdom afterward. Your suggestion that understanding the past need not determine one's future response to it has been influential in my decisions. I'm pleased if my observations proved helpful, Mr. Hargreaves. You seem to be finding your own path quite successfully." Charles nodded, his gaze sweeping the room with its mingling of villagers from all walks of life. "I'm trying to honor what was best in my uncle's stewardship, while addressing what was perhaps restrictive in his approach. It's a continual balance, as life so often is." Miss Marple agreed with a gentle smile. "Oh, I nearly forgot to mention, I've had word from Elizabeth. She's planning to visit in the spring, with her husband and children, their first trip to England." Charles's expression held genuine anticipation. "It will be rather remarkable, meeting family I never knew existed. A new chapter for the Hargreaves family," Miss Marple observed. "One with room for expanded definitions of connection and belonging." As the gathering concluded and guests began departing, Miss Marple found herself reflecting on the curious mixture of continuity and change that characterized human communities. Mary Mead remained fundamentally itself, a quintessential English village, with its established rhythms and relationships. Yet within that familiar structure, subtle evolutions occurred constantly, some precipitated by tragedy, others by simple passage of time. The Harvest Ball murder had revealed hidden currents beneath the village's seemingly placid surface: ambition, resentment, misplaced devotion, long-buried secrets. For a time, these revelations had dominated conversation and consciousness, threatening to permanently alter Mary Mead's perception of itself. Yet human communities proved remarkably resilient. The shock had been absorbed, the participants in the tragedy removed through legal processes, and daily life had gradually reclaimed its central position in village awareness. Not unchanged, there remained an undercurrent of wariness, a heightened recognition that outward appearances might conceal complex realities, but fundamentally continuous, adapting rather than fracturing under pressure. As Mr. Fairweather drove her home through the gently falling snow, Miss Marple contemplated this resilience with quiet appreciation. Her long observation of human nature had revealed both its capacity for deception and calculation, and its parallel capacity for adaptation and renewal. The Harvest Ball murder had exemplified the former. The community's gradual healing demonstrated the latter. Back in her cottage, warming herself before the fire as Cherry prepared her evening cocoa, Miss Marple acknowledged that this case, like so many before it, had reinforced her fundamental understanding of humanity. Deeply flawed, yet persistently hopeful, capable of terrible actions, yet equally capable of remarkable recovery. The threads of circumstance, choice, consequence, and adaptation formed a pattern as intricate as any knitting design, yet following recognizable principles that she had observed throughout her long life in St. Mary Mead. Understanding these patterns didn't eliminate tragedy or prevent human failing, but it offered perspective, a reminder that even the darkest human actions occurred within a larger context of community resilience and potential redemption. As she prepared for bed, Miss Marple glanced at her partially completed christening gown, a symbol of continuity and new beginnings intertwined. Tomorrow she would resume work on it, adding delicate stitches to the evolving pattern, with the same patient attention she brought to observing human nature in all its complex, contradictory, endlessly fascinating manifestations. Outside her window, snow continued falling on St. Mary Mead, covering the scars of autumn's violence with winter's clean simplicity. Spring would eventually follow, bringing new growth, new challenges, perhaps new mysteries requiring her particular clarity of perception. The cycle would continue, as it always had, humanity stumbling forward through darkness and light, forever capable of both terrible cruelty and remarkable grace. Miss Marple drew her curtains against the night, secure in this understanding and in her own small but significant role as observer and occasional interpreter of the patterns that connected past, present, and future in her beloved village. and by extension the wider human community beyond its boundaries.